I still remember the anticipation buzzing in my chest as I stepped into that upscale restaurant. The warm glow of dim lights, the hum of quiet conversations, the soft clinking of glasses. It felt like the perfect setting for what was supposed to be a magical first date. I had spent extra time on my outfit, wanting to make a good impression. And why wouldn't I? Henry had seemed charming over text. Witty, confident, even a little flirtatious in a way that made me think he was the kind of man who knew exactly what he wanted. He had been the one to suggest the restaurant, calling it his favorite spot, so I expected him to be waiting when I arrived. But as I scanned the tables, he was nowhere to be seen. The host approached me with a polite smile. "Are you waiting for someone?" "Yes, Henry," I said, trying to keep my voice light despite the first flicker of irritation. "Before we dive in, I just want to take a moment to appreciate each and every one of you. Your support means the world and helps keep this community growing. If you enjoy thought-provoking content, consider subscribing. It's free and makes a big difference. Now let's begin." The host nodded, checked his list, and then gestured toward a corner table. He called ahead. Said he'd be a few minutes late but asked for this table specifically. I swallowed the irritation and smiled. A few minutes wasn't a big deal. Maybe traffic had been bad. Maybe he was parking. Maybe, well, I didn't want to overthink it. So I took my seat, ordered a glass of wine, and scrolled through my phone while waiting. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. When he finally walked in, there was no hurried apology, no sheepish grin. Just an easy, confident stride as if he owned the place. Henry was tall, well-dressed, and had a smirk that lingered on his lips as if he found everything amusing. "Abigail, right?" he said as he slid into the seat across from me. "Sorry I'm late. I lost track of time at the gym." I blinked. No apology. No acknowledgement of how long I had been sitting there. Just a casual excuse, as if making a woman wait for nearly half an hour was normal. Still, I smiled, determined not to let the evening be ruined by a rough start. "I hope you had a good workout." He grinned. "Always. You don't get a body like this by slacking, you know?" He leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms as if waiting for me to admire him. I laughed politely, unsure whether he was joking. But as the conversation progressed, it became increasingly clear that Henry wasn't someone who joked at his own expense, only at others. He spoke with a certain bravado, the kind that made it clear he thought highly of himself. He bragged about his high-paying job, about how women always swiped right on him, about how he had standards most women couldn't meet. He told me he had turned down a date last week because she didn't look as good in person as she did in her photos. Red flags. So many red flags. But I kept smiling, kept nodding, kept telling myself that maybe he was just nervous and overcompensating. Then the food arrived. Henry had ordered extravagantly: steak, lobster, a bottle of the restaurant's finest wine. Meanwhile, I had settled for something modest, not wanting to assume he'd be covering the bill. As we ate, he barely asked me anything about myself. Instead, he talked about his investments, his workout routine, his future empire. It was as if he saw me not as a person but as an audience. And then, as the meal neared its end, the check arrived. The waiter placed it neatly between us and walked away. I reached for my purse out of habit, but I paused, waiting to see what Henry would do. After all, he had chosen this restaurant. He had ordered the most expensive items. Surely he would at least offer. But Henry didn't even glance at the bill. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the last sip of wine in his glass, and smirked. "This is a test," he said smoothly. "A real wife should be willing to pay for her man." For a moment I thought he was joking. I let out a short laugh, waiting for the punchline. But his smirk remained, his expression expectant. He was serious. I stared at him, my stomach twisting with a mix of disbelief and irritation. Not because of the money, I could afford it. That wasn't the point. It was the audacity, the entitlement, the way he framed it as some kind of twisted test. I should have walked out right then. I should have left him there, forced him to cover his own extravagant meal. But something in me wanted to see how far he would take this. So I smiled, pulled out my card, and paid. Henry's smirk widened as if he had just won a game. "You passed," he said, raising his glass in a mock toast. I clinked my glass against his and took a sip, masking my disgust. Then he had the nerve to lean in and say, "So when's date number 2? That was the moment I knew exactly who he was. A man who played games. A man who saw relationships as tests, as competitions where he always had to come out on top. A man who thought women had to prove their worth to him, but he never had to prove anything in return. I stood up, gathering my things. "I'll let you know," I said, voice light and playful. His grin deepened, clearly assuming he had won me over. But as I walked away, I blocked his number before I even reached the door. I didn't look back. That should have been the last time I ever saw him. It should have been nothing more than an amusing story I told my friends over drinks. A cautionary tale about the worst first date I had ever been on. But fate had other plans. Because years later, Henry would walk into another restaurant for another date. And this time he wouldn't be the one in control. As I walked away from that restaurant, blocking Henry's number before I even reached my car, I told myself I'd never think about him again. He was just another lesson. A cautionary tale, a reminder of the kind of man I would never tolerate. But lessons, even the harshest ones, shape us in ways we don't always realize in the moment. 4 months after that night, I found myself reflecting on the encounter, not because of Henry himself but because of what he represented. He was a type, a pattern I had seen before. A man who dangled approval like a prize, who treated relationships like a series of hoops a woman had to jump through. And as much as I wanted to believe he was an exception, the more I looked around, the more I saw variations of him everywhere. It wasn't just about one bad date. It was about how often women were expected to prove themselves while men simply existed, demanding admiration without effort. That realization settled into my bones, and rather than letting it make me bitter, I let it fuel me. I threw myself into my work with a new sense of purpose. As a relationship coach, I had always given advice, but now I wanted to go deeper. I started focusing on teaching women how to spot these red flags early, how to set boundaries before they found themselves entangled in a dynamic where they were always giving and never receiving. My sessions grew in popularity. Clients came to me with stories eerily similar to mine. Different men, different settings, but the same manipulative tactics. The more I worked with these women, the more I recognized the shift in myself. I had always been confident, but now I was unshakable. I no longer second-guessed my worth, no longer excused bad behavior under the guise of giving someone a chance. And with that clarity came a surprising side effect. I was no longer in a rush to find love. It wasn't that I had given up on relationships. I still believed in them, still wanted one eventually. But I was in no hurry. My life was full, my success growing, my peace intact. The idea of settling for a mediocre love just to fill a space felt laughable now. Ironically, that's when the universe decided to test me. One evening, after a particularly long day of back-to-back coaching calls, my best friend Claire called me, excitement practically crackling through the phone. "I found him," she declared. I frowned, kicking off my heels as I collapsed onto my couch. "Found who?" "The perfect guy for you," she said. "You've been working too much. You need to get out, meet people. So I set you up on a blind date." I groaned. "Claire." "Nope, don't fight me on this," she interrupted. "I know your type and I swear he checks all your boxes. He's successful, charming, and actually respects women. Just one date, that's all I'm asking." I sighed, rubbing my temples. I trusted Claire, she knew me better than anyone. And she wasn't wrong. I had been so focused on work that I hadn't given dating much thought in months. Maybe a low-stakes dinner with someone new wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. "Fine," I said. "One date." She squealed in delight and texted me the details before I could change my mind. The day of the date, I didn't feel nervous, just mildly curious. I had no expectations, no fantasies about what it could turn into. If it was good, great. If not, at least I'd have a nice meal. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early, scanning the room for any sign of my mystery date. The host led me to a quiet corner table and I settled into my seat, casually checking my phone. Then the door opened, and my blood turned to ice. "Henry." He strolled in, exuding that same confidence, that same smug self-assurance. My heart hammered, not from nerves but from sheer disbelief. What were the odds? He hadn't seen me yet. He was scanning the room, probably looking for the woman he thought he was about to impress. Then his gaze landed on me. And he froze. For the first time since I had met him, I saw something crack in his expression. Recognition. Confusion. A flicker of something that looked almost like unease. He hesitated for half a second before recovering, plastering on a grin as he walked toward me. Well, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Small world, huh?" I smiled, folding my hands neatly on the table. "It really is." He leaned back, studying me as if trying to piece together how this had happened. Did you set this up? I arched a brow. Why would I do that? His grin widened, but there was an edge to it now. Funny, I was actually looking forward to meeting my blind date tonight. I tilted my head. You still are. His smile faltered for a split second. This was different. The last time I had sat across from Henry, I had been polite, eager to give him the benefit of the doubt. Now I was a woman who knew exactly who she was dealing with. So, I said, casually picking up my menu. Tell me about yourself, Henry. What do you do for a living? He blinked as if thrown off by the sudden shift. I run my own business. I nodded. Impressive. And tell me, do you still believe women should prove themselves by paying for your extravagant meals? His jaw tightened. You remember that, huh? Oh, I never forget a good test. He laughed, but it was forced. Look, Abigail, I was younger then. I've grown since that night. I smiled. Good. Because I have too. The waiter arrived, and Henry, perhaps eager to prove his growth, immediately waved him over. I'll take a Scotch neat, he said. Then, glancing at me, order whatever you'd like. My treat. I bit back a smirk. Oh, this was going to be fun. The night was only just beginning. Henry's confidence was something to admire. Misplaced, inflated, but unwavering. As he signaled the waiter and proudly declared that he would be paying for dinner, I could see the silent performance unfolding. This wasn't about generosity. It was about control. About rewriting history. About convincing me and, more importantly, himself that he had changed. I leaned back in my chair, watching him as if I were the audience to a one-man show. He smirked, swirled his drink, and leaned forward, eager to reclaim the dominance he believed he had lost. So, Abigail, he said, his voice carrying the same self-assured tone I remembered. What have you been up to all these years? Besides, missing me? I let out a soft chuckle, tilting my head slightly. Oh, just building my empire. His smirk twitched, momentarily caught off guard. Empire. I took a sip of my wine before setting the glass down. Yes. I run a relationship consultancy now. Helping women identify red flags, build their confidence, and ensure they don't waste their time on the wrong kind of men. The smile on Henry's face faltered just slightly, but he recovered quickly. Wow. So you turned dating into a business? More like a mission, I corrected, holding his gaze. You'd be surprised how many women out there have had experiences just like mine. His jaw tensed ever so slightly, but he forced a laugh. Come on, that was years ago. I was just messing around back then. I didn't really think you'd take it that seriously. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, I didn't take it personally. But I did find it educational. He shifted in his chair, taking a quick sip of his drink. I could see the gears in his head turning. He was trying to gauge if this was still a flirtatious game, if he could still steer the conversation in his favor. So what's the biggest lesson you teach women? He asked, leaning in as if genuinely interested. I smiled, not missing the challenge in his tone. To never ignore the first red flag. For the first time that evening, his confidence wavered. Just a flicker, but it was there. A crack in the armor he had so carefully crafted. The waiter arrived, setting down our plates. Henry immediately dove into his steak, but I took my time watching him, waiting. I knew him now. I knew how men like him worked. The only question was, how far was he willing to go to prove himself? So, I continued, cutting a small piece of my food. Tell me, Henry. What's changed? He swallowed quickly, dabbing his mouth with the napkin. What do you mean? Well, I said, gesturing toward him, you seem eager to impress me tonight. And if I recall, the last time we sat across from each other, I was the one picking up the tab. So what's different now? His smile was tighter now, forced. I've grown up, Abigail. I'm not the same guy I was back then. I nodded slowly, setting down my fork. That's good to hear. So no more tests for the women you date. His laugh was strained. Come on, don't tell me you're still thinking about that. It was just a joke. Was it? I asked, tilting my head. Because I've spoken to a few women who've gone on dates with you since then. And, funnily enough, they all have similar stories. His entire body went still. For the first time, true tension crackled between us. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. Would you like me to list their names? His hand tightened around his glass. I don't know what you're talking about. I let the silence stretch between us, watching as he struggled to maintain his composure. He had walked into this dinner believing he was in control. That I was just another woman who had fallen for his charm. He had no idea that I had been waiting for this moment. "Relax, Henry," I finally said, taking another sip of wine. "I'm not here to expose you." He exhaled slowly, forcing out a chuckle. "Good. Because you're making it sound like I'm some kind of villain." I smiled. "Are you?" His expression hardened for just a second before he laughed again, shaking his head. "You really haven't changed, have you?" "Oh, I've changed plenty," I said. "I just don't play games anymore." The conversation shifted after that. He tried to regain his footing, steering the discussion toward lighter topics, but I could see the difference in him now. The certainty, the cockiness, it had been shaken. When the bill arrived, he reached for it quickly, eager to prove something. "I've got this." I didn't stop him. I simply leaned back, watching as he pulled out his card. The waiter took it, nodded, and disappeared. Henry took a deep breath, flashing me a grin. "See? I told you I've changed." A beat passed. Then another. The waiter returned, holding the card. "I'm sorry, sir, but your payment didn't go through." The color drained from Henry's face. He blinked, then forced a laugh, reaching into his wallet. "That's weird. Try this one." The second card was declined. Then the third. His fingers clenched around his wallet, his eyes darting around the restaurant, panic creeping into his expression. He avoided my gaze, muttering something about a bank error. I sat there, silent, letting the weight of the moment settle around him. And then, just like he had done to me all those years ago, I leaned forward, smiling sweetly. "Don't worry, babe," I said, my voice dripping with amusement. "Okay. Consider it a charity donation." His jaw tensed, his entire body stiffening. He knew exactly what I was doing. I took my time, sliding my card toward the waiter who, bless him, bit back his own smirk. Henry swallowed hard, his hands tightening into fists beneath the table. "Abigail." I stood up, smoothing down my dress. "You know, Henry, I used to think of our first date as my worst experience. But now I think it was the best lesson I ever had." He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I grabbed my purse, slipped a generous tip to the waiter, and turned to leave. As I reached the door, I pulled out my phone. Walked. This time I didn't even hesitate. As I stepped out of the restaurant, the night air felt crisp against my skin, as if the universe itself had exhaled alongside me. I had done what I needed to do, closed a chapter one never even realized had been left open. But something lingered, an unsettling feeling that Henry wasn't the type to take humiliation lightly. I didn't regret what I had done. Not for a second. If anything, I had given him a taste of the very test he had subjected so many women to. The difference? Mine wasn't a test to determine worth. It was a lesson to remind him that actions have consequences. My phone buzzed in my hand. "Henry, we need to talk." I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. Predictable. He wouldn't let this go, not without trying to regain control, to flip the script. But I was no longer the woman he could toy with. I slid into my car, taking a deep breath before deciding to respond. Just once. "Me, there's nothing left to say. You finally got to experience what you put others through. How does it feel?" The typing bubbles appeared instantly, hesitated, then disappeared. I could picture him seething, scrambling for the perfect comeback, something that would knock me off balance. But I wasn't that girl anymore. That night I let it go. Or at least I thought I did. But the next morning my past found a way of catching up with me. I was in the middle of a client session when an email notification popped up on my laptop. The subject line made my stomach tighten. "You won't get away with this." I clicked it, already knowing who it was from. "Henry. Abigail, you think you're clever, don't you? You think you've won some kind of battle. But let me tell you something, you haven't. You embarrassed me, sure. But that's temporary. What you did was low. You think you're a relationship expert? That you're helping women? All you're doing is feeding them lies, making them think men like me are the enemy. But you know what? I'll make sure people see who you really are. I wouldn't be surprised if you start losing clients once they realize what kind of person you are. Let's see how confident you are when that empire of yours starts to crumble." I leaned back, staring at the screen, the heat in my chest shifting from anger to something far colder. Amusement. He still believed he had some kind of power over me. That he could shake me, intimidate me. But Henry didn't know who he was dealing with anymore. I closed the email, exhaled, and got back to my session. Because that was the thing about men like him. They thrived on reaction. And I wasn't about to give him one. But fate had other plans. 2 days later, Claire called, her voice thick with barely contained glee. "Oh my God, have you seen it?" I frowned, shifting my phone to my other ear. "Seen what?" She cackled. "Check your socials. You're going viral." I sat up straighter, unlocking my phone and opening the app. And there was a woman, a complete stranger, had posted a story about her experience with Henry. "So, I went on a date with this guy, Henry. He looked great on paper. Tall, charming, successful. But the minute we sat down, he told me he had a test to see if I was worth his time. And guess what? The test was me paying for everything while he sat there smirking like he was the prize." I left. But the best part? Apparently, this dude tried the same trick on a woman who is now a professional relationship coach, and SG got the ultimate payback. If you haven't seen her work, check out Abigail's content. We should all take notes. The post had thousands of shares. Comments flooded in, each one roasting Henry more than the last. Wait, is this the same Henry the first went out with? Because same story. This man really thought he was running an experiment and got experimented on. "Abigail, if you ever write a book, I'm buying 10 copies. I sat there, stunned. I hadn't planned for this. I hadn't asked for this. But somehow my revenge had taken on a life of its own. And Henry? He was drowning in it. I knew it was only a matter of time before he reached out again. He wouldn't let this go, not without trying to salvage whatever was left of his reputation. Sure enough, later that night another email came through. This time the subject line read, "You need to fix this." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Because for once Henry was the one scrambling, trying to pass a test he had never expected to take. I closed my laptop, feeling something I hadn't in a long time, complete and utter peace. Because the best revenge? It had already happened. And I hadn't even needed to lift a finger. The satisfaction of seeing Henry's reputation crumble was sweet, but the story wasn't over. I had closed my laptop that night feeling like the chapter was finally finished. I had moved on, left him behind, and let karma do its job. But men like Henry never go down quietly. The next morning I woke up to a string of missed calls from an unknown number. I knew who it was before I even checked my email. Sure enough, another message sat waiting for me. "Henry, you need to make this stop. You've taken things too far, Abigail." I smirked at the sheer irony of it. He thought I was the one responsible for the avalanche of women coming forward, for the viral post that had become its own storm. But the truth was, I had done nothing except let the world see him for who he truly was. I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say. But Henry wasn't done. Later that evening, as I wrapped up a consultation call, a knock echoed at my door. My stomach tightened. No one showed up at my place unannounced. My friends always texted first. A chill ran down my spine as I made my way to the peephole. It was Henry. I stepped back instinctively, heart pounding. How did he even know where I lived? He knocked again, firmer this time. "Abigail, I know you're home." His voice was tense, low, controlled, but there was an edge to it, something simmering beneath the surface. I didn't open the door. "You need to leave, Henry." Silence. Then a humorless chuckle. "So, you're just going to hide?" I gritted my teeth. "I'm not hiding. I just don't have anything to say to you." He let out a slow breath. "Look, I get it. You think this is funny, you think you won. But you don't understand what you've done. My job is on the line, Abigail. My family is asking questions. My friends won't even return my calls. This isn't just a joke anymore." I leaned against the door, arms crossed. "It was never a joke, Henry. It was your reality catching up to you." He scoffed. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think ruining my life makes you better than me?" I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. "I didn't ruin your life. You did that all on your own." Silence stretched between us again. When he spoke next, his voice was lower, almost pleading. I just need this to stop. Call off your little army. Tell them I'm not some villain." I sighed, pressing my fingers to my temple. "Henry, you're not the victim here. If women are speaking up, it's because they finally feel like they can. That has nothing to do with me. Maybe instead of blaming me, you should take a long, hard look at yourself." Pause. Then a muttered curse under his breath. I heard the shuffle of his shoes as he stepped back. "You're unbelievable." And just like that, his presence faded. I waited until I was sure he was gone before exhaling, my shoulders finally relaxing. I thought that was the end of it. I thought he would accept his fate and disappear from my life for good. But Henry had never been one to go down without a fight. The next day a post appeared online. A long-winded, self-pitying monologue about how a certain woman had orchestrated an entire campaign against him. How she had twisted his words, manipulated the truth, and encouraged women to fabricate stories about him. He didn't use my name, but everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. The comments were ruthless. "So now you're playing the victim? Dude, you literally did this to yourself." Gaslighting at its finest. Bro thought he was a mastermind but forgot karma exists. Henry had wanted sympathy, but he had miscalculated. Again. Women weren't just angry. They were tired. Tired of men like him. Tired of being told their experiences weren't real. Tired of being treated like they had to pass a test just to be valued. By the time I checked the post, it had already backfired spectacularly. His attempt at damage control had only made things worse. I could have responded. I could have written a long rebuttal, detailing every lie he had ever told, every woman he had ever played. But I didn't need to. Because this time I wasn't the one leading the charge. The world was handling it for me. A week later, Henry deleted his social media accounts. His name faded from conversations. The viral moment passed, as all things eventually do. And just like that, he was gone. I sat on my balcony one evening, sipping a glass of wine, letting the last remnants of the whole ordeal settle inside me. There was no victory dance, no gloating. Just a quiet sense of finality. I had never sought revenge. All I had wanted was to live my life, to move forward. But sometimes the best revenge wasn't about orchestrating someone's downfall. It was about standing so firmly in your truth that the world saw them for who they really were. And in the end, Henry had unraveled all on his own. Even after Henry disappeared from the online world, I expected some part of him to resurface, like a bad memory that refuses to fade completely. But days turned into weeks and then months, and there was nothing. No emails, no calls, no cryptic posts trying to rewrite the narrative. It was as if he had simply faded into irrelevance. And that, more than anything, was what I knew he wouldn't be able to stand. But I had long stopped worrying about him. My work was flourishing more than ever. The viral moment had brought in new clients, but more importantly, it had ignited a conversation that needed to happen. Women were more vocal about their experiences, more willing to call out behaviors they once dismissed as just how men are. It felt like progress. One afternoon, Claire and I sat at a small cafe, sipping iced lattes as the sun bathed the streets in gold. She was scrolling through her phone, pausing every so often to show me memes, when suddenly she froze. "Oh, my God," she whispered, eyes wide. I raised a brow. "What?" She turned her phone toward me. "It's Henry." I stiffened but forced myself to look. The post wasn't from him. It was from a local business networking page. The caption read, "From CEO to unemployed. When arrogance costs you everything." My stomach tightened. Claire clicked on the link, skimming quickly before glancing up at me. "He lost his job." I inhaled slowly, my fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Are you surprised?" She shook her head. "No, but it's worse than I thought. He didn't just lose his job, he lost everything. Turns out his company started investigating him after all the social media backlash. Clients dropped him. Investors backed out. They dug into his past, found some questionable practices, and cut ties. And get this, he tried to start over somewhere else, but his name is too well known now. Nobody wants to work with him." I exhaled, staring at the screen. I should have felt triumphant. This was, after all, the poetic justice so many had hoped for. But instead I just felt detached. Like I was reading about a stranger, someone I had once known in another life but no longer recognized. Claire nudged me. "Say something. This is exactly what he deserved." I nodded slowly, then took a sip of my drink. "It is." But there was a weight in my chest, something unexpected. Not regret, never that. But a realization. Henry had spent years believing he was untouchable. That his charm, his manipulation, his so-called tests made him superior. And now he had nothing. He had been tested in a way he never saw coming, and he had failed. Claire studied me, her expression softening. "Do you feel bad for him?" I shook my head. "No. But I do feel something." "Like what?" I hesitated. Like I just watched someone self-destruct in slow motion. And I didn't even have to do anything to push him there. He did it all on his own. Claire sighed, leaning back. Well, at least now you know it's really over. And I did. For the first time in a long time, I truly did. A week later, I received an email. Not from Henry. From his mother. I stared at the name in my inbox for a long time before clicking it. Abigail. I know you have no reason to hear me out and I don't expect a response. But I wanted to reach out woman to woman because I need you to understand something. I raised my son to be better than this. And I failed. I know what he did to you and to so many others. I've watched everything unfold. The stories, the consequences, the downfall. I can't excuse his behavior and I won't. But I will say this. He is paying the price now. More than you may ever know. And maybe he deserves it, but I'm still his mother. And it hurts to see your child destroy himself. I'm not asking for anything from you. I just needed you to know that he is not okay. And I don't know if he ever will be. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. This was not a letter begging for forgiveness. It wasn't an attempt to undo what had been done. It was just raw. And unexpectedly, it reached a part of me I hadn't even realized was still open. I never wrote back. But I did sit with it for a long time. People like Henry believed they were invincible until reality proved otherwise. He had been tested, but not by me, by life, by the very people he underestimated. And now for the first time he was facing a version of himself he couldn't escape. One afternoon months later I walked by a small bookstore downtown and saw a familiar figure sitting at a corner table, staring at a cup of coffee like it held all the answers he had lost. Henry. He looked different. The sharp arrogance was gone, replaced by something more hollow, more uncertain. His suit was gone, replaced by simple jeans and a plain shirt. He looked normal. And for a moment, just a moment, our eyes met through the glass. I expected something, anger, resentment, maybe even an attempt to regain control. But there was nothing. Just a quiet understanding. He didn't wave. Didn't smirk. Didn't try to talk to me. He just nodded. I nodded back. And then I walked away. Because this time I knew he wouldn't follow. And that was all the closure I ever needed. My sister-in-law swore she'd ruin me. When she left a bag of stolen jewelry in my car to frame me, she never realized I had installed a dashcam. The footage ended her game for good. The day started like any other. I arrived at work, coffee in hand, mentally preparing for another long day at the office. The hum of conversations and ringing phones filled the space as my colleagues settled into their routines. Nothing seemed out of place until the moment they walked in. A cluster of uniformed officers entered the building, their presence cutting through the usual office chatter like a knife. People turned their heads, eyes widening as the officers marched toward my desk. My stomach clenched, an unexplainable dread washing over me. "Are you Emily Carter?" one of them asked, his voice firm and unwavering. I barely had time to nod before he continued. "You're under arrest for grand larceny. Put your hands where we can see them." For a moment I thought I had misheard him. Grand larceny? The words didn't make sense. My body stiffened, heart hammering in my chest. I heard the gasps around me, felt the stares burning into my skin. "This has to be a mistake," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't done anything." But they weren't listening. The officer closest to me pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Cold metal snapped around my wrists, the sharp click echoing in my ears. "Emily." My manager, Daniel, stepped forward, looking as stunned as I felt. "What's going on?" I don't know," I choked out. My vision blurred, panic setting in as I turned to the officers. "Please, this has to be a misunderstanding." "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," the officer began, reciting the Miranda rights as they started leading me toward the exit. Around me, my coworkers whispered, some leaning in to get a better look. I caught sight of Karen, the office gossip, already pulling out her phone, no doubt ready to spread the news like wildfire. This wasn't happening. This had to be some sick joke. But it wasn't. As I was dragged through the office, my eyes darted around, searching for something, someone, to help me. Then, like instinct, I fumbled for my phone in my pocket and managed to press the speed dial button for my husband, Ryan. He picked up after the first ring. "Ryan," I gasped, my voice shaking. I'm being arrested. You need to come." Before I could finish, one of the officers grabbed the phone from my hands. "You can make your call at the station," he said, ending the call with a single press. I stared in horror. What had just happened? What was I being accused of? The drive to the police station felt like a blur. The world outside the car window moved in fast forward, yet time had never dragged so slowly. My hands, still cuffed, rested stiffly in my lap as I tried to process the chaos unfolding around me. When we arrived, I was led through a maze of dull gray corridors and placed in a small interrogation room. The walls were bare except for a single mirror. One I knew had people watching behind it. A single metal table stood in the center, 2 chairs positioned on opposite sides. I sat there alone for what felt like an eternity before the door creaked open. 2 detectives entered, their expressions unreadable. One of them, a middle-aged man with sharp blue eyes, set a manila folder on the table before sliding into the chair across from me. "Emily Carter," he said as if confirming my existence. "Do you know why you're here?" I swallowed, my throat dry. "No," I whispered. "I don't." He flipped the folder open. Inside were pictures. My stomach dropped. They were photos of jewelry, expensive, elegant, unmistakably valuable. Necklaces, bracelets, earrings. "These items," the detective continued, "were reported stolen 2 days ago from the Carter family estate. They were found in your car this morning." My mind went blank. My car? What? No, this wasn't possible. I didn't, my voice cracked. I didn't steal anything. The second detective, a woman with a tight ponytail, leaned in. "Then how do you explain this?" She pushed another photo forward. This one showed a black duffel bag, unzipped, filled with jewelry, sitting right in the trunk of my car. "I don't know," I gasped, shaking my head. "That's not mine. I don't even own a bag like that." The male detective narrowed his eyes. "Do you expect us to believe that someone else put it there?" I clenched my fists, my mind racing. That's exactly what happened. Someone had framed me. And I already had a sickening feeling about who it was. The door creaked open again and my breath caught in my throat. Olivia, my sister-in-law, walked in, her expression filled with perfectly rehearsed concern. She wore a sleek, expensive coat, her long brown hair curled to perfection, and her delicate features contorted into a mask of sympathy. "Emily," she whispered, her voice dripping with fake sorrow as she rushed to my side. "I came as soon as I heard. Are you okay?" I stared at her. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched her lie to my face. "Oh, detectives," she turned to them, shaking her head. "There must be some kind of mistake. Emily isn't a thief." The words made my stomach churn. Was she mocking me? She was the reason I was here. And yet she had the audacity to play the role of a devoted family member? "We just have some questions for her," the male detective responded, his tone neutral. Olivia nodded. "Of course. Whatever you need." Then she turned back to me, leaning in, lowering her voice. "Don't worry," she murmured, her hand grazing my wrist in a mock gesture of comfort. "I'll talk to Ryan. We'll figure this out." "Ryan." A fresh wave of panic surged through me. I turned to the detectives. "Can I make my call now?" My voice was strained, desperate. The woman nodded. "Go ahead." They handed me back my phone. With trembling fingers, I dialed Ryan's number again. He didn't answer. I tried again. Voicemail. My throat tightened. Where was he? Why wasn't he picking up? I placed the phone down, my hands curling into fists. I was on my own. And as I turned my gaze back to Olivia, who smiled softly, as if she hadn't just orchestrated this entire nightmare, I realized the truth. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This was a trap. And Olivia had just made her biggest mistake. I sat in that cold, sterile interrogation room, Olivia's fake sympathy still lingering in the air like a noxious cloud. My hands, now free of the handcuffs, trembled slightly as I clenched them into fists. She had set me up. The realization wasn't just painful, it was infuriating. And worse, she was enjoying every second of it. I had been in the Carter family long enough to know that Olivia thrived on deception. She didn't just tell lies, she wove them like an artist, painting herself as the perpetual victim while tearing others down. But this was a new level of cruelty even for her. I could see it in her eyes, a flicker of amusement, a quiet thrill. She had always loved chaos, but this time she had played her hand too soon. Olivia had been trouble long before I married into the family. My husband, Ryan, always made excuses for her. She was misunderstood, she had a rough childhood, she just needed love. But I knew better. Her history spoke for itself. There were stories, whispered but never fully addressed, of missing money, misplaced jewelry, and strange disappearances within the Carter household. Somehow, no matter how suspicious the circumstances, Olivia was never to blame. Ryan's parents, Margaret and Richard Carter, always turned a blind eye. They dismissed every accusation against Olivia with a wave of the hand, treating them as harmless mistakes or worse, deliberate lies made by people jealous of her. I remember when my mother-in-law lost her wedding ring, an heirloom passed down for generations. It was a massive ordeal. Servants were questioned, the house was torn apart, and accusations were thrown. Olivia had been staying with them at the time, yet no one dared to question her. A week later, the ring mysteriously reappeared in the kitchen, stuffed into the pocket of the housemaid's apron. The maid was fired immediately. I always wondered if Olivia had planted it there. Then there was the incident with her ex-best friend, Jessica. Jessica had trusted Olivia with a family bracelet, one encrusted with diamonds, and shortly after, the bracelet went missing. The police got involved, but Olivia turned the situation around, painting Jessica as a paranoid, unstable woman who had simply misplaced her own jewelry. No charges were ever filed. Jessica, humiliated, left town. And yet, a few months later, Olivia showed up to a party wearing a bracelet eerily similar to the one Jessica had lost. Her past was riddled with similar stories, all ending the same way. Olivia walked away unscathed while someone else took the fall. And now, I was the next name on her list. From the moment I married Ryan, I had felt like an outsider. It wasn't outright hostility, at least not at first. It was subtle exclusions, dismissive smiles, inside jokes I was never part of. At family gatherings, Olivia was the golden child and I was the wife of their son. Not a daughter. Not family. Just an attachment to Ryan. I had tried, God, I had tried. I played the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law, attended the charity events, made small talk with Margaret's snob of friends, and even bit my tongue when Olivia made snide remarks about my middle-class upbringing. But it was never enough. Margaret always clung to Olivia, blindly defending her no matter how reckless, irresponsible, or cruel she was. Ryan did the same. No. Now, when Olivia had framed me for a crime I didn't commit, they didn't even hesitate before believing her. I had been naive to think they would ever take my side. Looking back, the signs had been there all along. A week before my arrest, small things started going missing from my home. Nothing major, just enough to make me doubt myself. A pair of earrings I swore I had left on my nightstand. A bracelet that vanished from my jewelry box, only to reappear days later in my car's cup holder. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful. Then there were the scratches on my car door. Deep, deliberate marks that hadn't been there before. Ryan brushed it off, saying it was probably a careless driver in a parking lot. But something about it didn't sit right. Then there was Olivia's sudden kindness. She had never been particularly warm toward me, but a few days before my arrest, she changed. She started calling, checking in on me, offering to help with errands. At first, I assumed she was just in one of her good phases. The rare moments where she pretended to be sweet and supportive. But now I knew. She had been preparing the trap. The only reason I had installed a hidden dashcam was because of the scratches on my car. I didn't expect it to be the thing that would save me. After my arrest, when I was finally released on bail, I couldn't stop thinking about those missing items, those tiny moments that hadn't made sense. And then it hit me, my dashcam had been running that night. I rushed home, heart pounding, and retrieved the footage. I sat on my bed, laptop open, hands trembling as I clicked play. And there she was. Olivia. Clear as day, wearing her expensive coat and high heels, sneaking into my car. She moved with practiced ease, placing a black duffel bag in my trunk before carefully closing it. She paused, glanced around, then walked away like nothing happened. I felt like I was going to be sick. She had done this before. So many times. To others. To me. And she had expected to get away with it. Not this time. I replayed the footage over and over, committing every second to memory. Then I did something Olivia had never expected. I didn't go straight to the police. No. I was going to make sure she regretted this for the rest of her life. Because Olivia had spent her whole life framing others. This time I was framing her. And I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to destroy hers. I sat on my bed, the laptop screen casting a cold glow on my face as I replayed the dashcam footage. Olivia's face, her smug, careless expression as she planted the bag of stolen jewelry in my trunk, was burned into my memory. I could have gone to the police right then and there. I could have walked into the station, handed them the footage and let them take her away. But that would have been too easy. She needed to feel the walls closing in on her just like I had. I shut my laptop and took a deep breath, steadying myself. No, I wouldn't rush this. I would wait. Watch. Let Olivia think she had won. Because if there was one thing I knew about her, it was this: she always overplayed her hand. The next morning, I did something that felt like swallowing glass. I called Olivia. She picked up on the first ring, her voice honey-sweet. "Emily, oh my God. Are you okay?" I gritted my teeth. I don't know," I whispered, forcing my voice to tremble. "Ryan won't return my calls. Your parents won't even look at me. I don't know what to do." Pause. Then a small exhale of satisfaction. "I know, sweetie. It's a mess. But you have to stay strong." She spoke as if she cared, but I could hear it, the quiet triumph in her tone. She thought she had broken me. "I just don't understand how this happened," I continued, my voice weak. "The police said the jewelry was in my car, but I never put it there. Olivia, I feel like someone set me up." Another pause. This time sharper. "Emily, you're not suggesting someone framed you, are you?" Her voice was calm, but there was something else beneath it. A warning. I let out a shaky sigh. No, of course not. God, I don't know. I feel like I'm losing my mind." She laughed softly. "Oh honey, you just need rest. Stay low for a while. This will all blow over." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "Thank you, Olivia. I don't know what I'd do without you." She sighed happily, like a predator settling into a warm den. That's what family is for. She had no idea I was about to bury her. For the next week I played my part. I avoided calls, kept my head down and let the rumors spread. I could feel the shift. People in Ryan's family whispering about me, pitying me, doubting me. And Olivia? She thrived in the chaos. She started showing up at family gatherings without me, playing the concerned sister-in-law, shaking her head as she fed them half-truths. "She's devastated," I overheard her telling someone at a charity event. "She won't even leave the house. It's so sad." "Do you think she really did it?" Another voice, softer, hesitant. A perfectly timed pause from Olivia. Things like, "I just don't know anymore." And just like that, she planted the seed. I let it happen. I let her enjoy her victory. Because the higher she climbed, the harder she would fall. I knew Olivia wasn't satisfied with just ruining my reputation. She had done this before. She loved to make sure her victims never got back up. And sure enough, she couldn't help herself. It started small. A fake anonymous tip to my employer, suggesting I had a history of stealing. They dismissed it, but I made sure to document the call. A mysterious email to Ryan from a burner account, implying that I had been hiding things from him. I printed the email and traced its origin, Olivia's personal laptop. And then the final nail in her coffin. A second planted theft. One morning I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside, a gold necklace. Olivia wasn't even being subtle anymore. She wanted me arrested again. That was the moment I knew it was time. Olivia's wedding rehearsal dinner was the event of the season. A grand, extravagant gathering of the wealthy and elite, filled with glittering chandeliers, expensive champagne and whispers of power. Her fiancé, Daniel Whitmore, came from old money. The kind of family that valued image above all else. And Olivia had played the perfect role, the poised, flawless bride-to-be. I had to make sure that when she fell hard. And I had the perfect plan. I arrived at the venue dressed in subdued elegance. A simple black dress, no jewelry, no excess. Just a quiet presence in a room filled with noise. People noticed. I felt the stares. The whispers. What is she doing here? Why would Olivia invite her? They thought I was here to beg for forgiveness. They had no idea I was about to destroy the entire evening. I waited until everyone was seated, champagne flutes in hand, laughter ringing through the ballroom. Olivia was glowing, standing at the head of the room, soaking in the adoration. I stood. The room fell silent. I turned to Olivia, my voice steady. I wanted to say something. She looked at me, her lips curving into a cruel smirk. "Emily, sweetie. This isn't really the time." "Oh, but it is," I said, pulling a small remote from my clutch. And with one click, the ballroom's projector screen lit up. The footage played. Olivia sneaking into my car. Olivia planting the stolen jewelry. Olivia walking away like nothing had happened. The room erupted. Her fiancé stood frozen, his face draining of color. Gasps, murmurs, shock. I watched as Olivia's world collapsed. And as she turned to me, her face twisted in fury, I leaned in and whispered, "Checkmate." She had spent her whole life playing games. But this time, she lost. The moment Olivia's world shattered, the entire ballroom fell into stunned silence. It was as if time itself had frozen. The murmur of conversation, the clinking of champagne glasses, the soft hum of the orchestra, everything stopped. On the massive screen behind me, the footage continued to play, the security timestamp flickering in the corner. Olivia, dressed in her usual designer coat, opening my car door. Olivia carefully placing the black duffel bag in my trunk. Olivia walking away like nothing happened. I turned back to face the crowd. All eyes were on her now. Her fiancé, Daniel, stood motionless, his face pale, eyes locked onto the screen. His parents, seated at the front, looked like they had been hit by a freight train. Margaret and Richard, Olivia's parents, were frozen in their seats, their fingers tightening around their glasses, but they said nothing. I watched Olivia waiting for the moment the reality of her downfall would set in. And then it happened. She laughed. It was sharp, forced, too loud. A brittle, almost hysterical sound that made the already uncomfortable silence even heavier. "Oh, come on," she scoffed, flipping her hair back. "You're really doing this? Playing edited footage to embarrass me at my own wedding rehearsal?" I stared at her. Was she seriously going to deny it? Before I could respond, Daniel finally spoke. "What the hell is this, Olivia?" His voice was strained, shaking, and softer than I expected. Olivia turned to him, her expression instantly shifting into one of mock hurt. "Daniel, sweetheart, this is ridiculous. This," she gestured at the screen, "this is fake. This is just Emily trying to ruin my night because she's bitter that she got caught stealing." I could almost admire her audacity. Almost. I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the polished floor. "Fake? You're calling security footage fake?" I let out a soft chuckle. "You should have been more careful, Olivia. The timestamps don't lie. The camera doesn't lie." Daniel's eyes flickered between the screen and Olivia, doubt creeping into his face. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice lower now. She hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Her gaze darted to her parents, seeking backup. Margaret was gripping Richard's arms so tightly her knuckles had gone white. But neither of them spoke. She turned to Ryan, my husband, or rather, the man who had once been my husband in everything but legal terms. He had nothing to say either. For the first time in her life, Olivia had no one to clean up her mess. Her voice wavered. "Daniel, you can't actually believe this, can you?" She let out a hollow laugh, reaching for his hand. "You know me." His jaw tightened, but he didn't pull away. "Not yet. This isn't me," she pleaded, desperation finally creeping in. "I would never do something like this." But now people in the crowd were whispering. Someone at the back murmured, "Didn't she get accused of stealing before? Her ex-friend, what's her name? Jessica?" I heard the same thing. Olivia heard them too. Her mask started cracking. I watched her scramble, grasping for an escape. "Mom?" She turned to Margaret, her voice high, panicked. "Mom, tell them." Margaret opened her mouth. Closed it. Then finally she let out a breath. "I think you've done enough, Olivia." And just like that her last lifeline snapped. "Fine," Olivia muttered, her tone suddenly shifting. "Fine. You know what? I did it. But it wasn't my idea." I raised a brow. "Oh, this should be good." She turned back to Daniel, grasping his arm now. "Baby, listen to me. I was being blackmailed. That's why I had to do it. Emily was threatening me. She said she'd tell people horrible things about me if I didn't frame her." Ryan finally spoke, his voice flat, emotionless. "That's the best you could come up with? Blackmail?" I almost laughed. This was just sad now. Daniel pulled his arm away, finally stepping back from her. His expression was cold now. "How much of what you've told me has been a lie?" Her lower lip trembled. "Daniel, please. Don't do this. This isn't what it looks like. I love you. But he wasn't listening anymore. He took one last look at her, one long, disgusted stare, before turning around and walking out of the ballroom. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back whispered, "He left her." I could see the horror dawn on Olivia's face. Daniel was gone. Her carefully built-up life was falling apart. And she still didn't know the worst part. The silence was broken by a new voice. "Olivia Carter?" The crowd parted as two uniformed officers stepped forward. Olivia's entire body stiffened. One of them pulled out a warrant. "You're under arrest for falsifying evidence, obstruction of justice, and attempted fraud. You have the right to remain silent." Olivia's eyes went wide. "What? No, you can't do this. I didn't do anything. The officer grabbed her wrist and started cuffing her. She screamed, "No. This isn't happening. Daniel, please tell them to stop. Ryan, help me. Mom, Dad, say something." But no one spoke. No one moved. I took a step closer, just enough to whisper, "You did this to yourself." She turned to me, her expression morphing from desperation to rage. You ruined me," she shrieked. "You." But her words were cut off as the officers led her away. I stood there watching as the doors closed behind them, her screaming fading into nothing. And then for the first time in weeks I breathed. It was over. She was finally gone. The night Olivia fell, she lost everything. Her fiancé had walked out, leaving her standing alone in front of a crowd that once admired her. Her parents, the same people who had always shielded her from consequences, sat frozen in shock, unable to lift a finger to help her this time. And then the ultimate humiliation. The police taking her away in handcuffs, her desperate screams echoing in the grand ballroom. For the first time in her life there was no escape. No excuses. No one left to manipulate. And for the first time in mine I was free. The morning after the disaster, Ryan showed up at my door. I almost didn't answer. I should have left him standing there the way he had left me when I needed him the most. But a part of me, maybe out of curiosity, maybe for closure, opened the door. He looked terrible. His usually neat appearance was a mess, dark circles under his eyes, his hands shoved into his pockets like a child caught stealing. "Emily," he said, voice rough. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "About what, Ryan? How you abandoned me. How you never questioned Olivia even for a second." His jaw tightened, guilt flashing in his eyes. "I was wrong." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Yeah, you were. I should have believed you," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "I should have seen through her. I was so blind. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. Emily, I miss you." His voice softened. "I want to fix this." I met his gaze, steady, unwavering. "Ryan," I said, my voice calm but firm, "some things can't be fixed." The realization hit him then, the truth he had been avoiding. I wasn't coming back. And I wasn't sorry for it. I packed my bags that afternoon. Not because I had been forced out, not because I had to run from a family that had never truly welcomed me, but because I chose to leave. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need Ryan's apologies or Margaret's forced politeness. I had spent years trying to belong in a place that had never truly been mine. And I was done. As I walked out of that house for the last time, I felt lighter than I had in years. This wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about reclaiming my life. Justice wasn't just about seeing Olivia punished. It wasn't about revenge. It was about freedom. And as I stepped forward into the unknown, I knew one thing for certain. I was finally free. He whisked me away to a mountain cabin after our wedding. Romantic, right? But every night he'd vanish to meditate. No intimacy. No touch. Just silence. When I asked, he said, "Celibacy deepens connection." So I filed annulment papers. Then I found hidden cameras. And a shrine with my face on it. I found the hidden cameras on our honeymoon. That moment shattered everything I thought I knew about Noah. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when I still believed in fairy tales. "We're almost there," Noah said, navigating the rental car around another hairpin turn. The mountains rose majestically around us, their peaks disappearing into wisps of cloud. I squeezed his hand on the gearshift, my wedding ring still feeling foreign and magical on my finger. "I can't believe we actually did it," I whispered, more to myself than to him. Just 3 months ago, we'd been strangers making eye contact across a crowded bookstore. Now I was Madison Wells. No, Madison Blackwood. driving to a secluded mountain cabin for our honeymoon. When Noah had suggested eloping after only 11 weeks of dating, my sister Ava thought I was having a mental breakdown. "Madison, you've never been impulsive a day in your life," she'd said during our last phone call. "You plan your grocery trips 2 weeks in advance. Now you're marrying a guy you barely know." But that was exactly why I did it. 28 years of careful planning had gotten me a sensible apartment, a stable job teaching 3rd grade, and exactly 0 great love stories. Noah was different. Intense, spiritual, looking at me like I was the answer to questions he'd been asking his whole life. The cabin appeared around the bend and my breath caught. It was perfect. Rustic logs with a wide porch surrounded by towering pines, not another building in sight. "It's beautiful," I said, turning to Noah with a smile that faltered when I saw his expression. Something had changed in his face the moment the cabin came into view. The warmth in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by something distant. "Noah." I touched his arm. He blinked and the moment passed. "Let's get our bags inside." The interior was everything the online listing had promised. Stone fireplace, plush furniture, huge windows framing mountain views. Noah carried our luggage in while I explored, running my fingers along the smooth wooden countertops in the kitchen, testing the softness of the king-sized bed upstairs. "This is going to be amazing," I called down to him, imagining cozy nights by the fire, hikes to nearby waterfalls, and long, languid mornings in bed. I'd packed some special lingerie that had made the saleswoman at the boutique raise her eyebrows. When Noah didn't answer, I went back downstairs to find him standing in the center of the living room, staring blankly out the window. "Everything okay?" I asked, sliding my arms around his waist from behind. He stiffened at my touch. "Fine. Just tired from the drive." That night, I made pasta with the groceries we'd picked up in the last town before the mountain roads began. Noah barely touched his food, answering my excited chatter about our plans for the week with single words. The silence between us grew, filled only by the clink of forks against plates and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. "Maybe we should open some wine?" I suggested, trying to recapture the easy intimacy we'd had during our short courtship. "I think I'll pass," Noah said, standing abruptly. "I need to clear my head. The altitude, you know." Before I could respond, he was pulling on his jacket. "I'm going for a walk." "Now. It's getting dark." "I won't go far." The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow seemed louder than a slam would have been. I sat alone at our romantic dinner table, the pasta growing cold. This wasn't how I'd imagined our first night. Maybe he really was just tired, I reasoned. The wedding, the drive, it was a lot to process. Tomorrow would be better. But tomorrow brought more of the same. Noah was polite but distant, moving around me like we were roommates rather than newlyweds. When I suggested a hike to a nearby lake, he agreed without enthusiasm. The forest around us was breathtaking, sunlight filtering through ancient trees, wildflowers dotting the path, but I couldn't enjoy it with the wall I felt growing between us. "Isn't this perfect?" I asked, gesturing to the crystal blue lake when we reached it. A family of ducks skimmed across the surface, leaving gentle ripples in their wake. "It's very peaceful," Noah replied, his voice flat. "That's all you have to say?" The words burst out before I could stop them. "Noah, what's going on? Since we got here, you've been different." He looked at me, then really looked at me for the first time since our arrival. "I'm sorry, Madison. I just need time to adjust. This place, it has a certain energy. I feel it calling me to go deeper." "Deeper into what?" "Myself," he said simply. That night, after another quiet dinner, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I drew a bath in the cabin's enormous clawfoot tub, scattering rose petals I'd packed for just such an occasion on the water's surface. I put on the black silk negligee, applied a touch of the perfume Noah had once said drove him wild, and waited in our bed. An hour passed. Then another. The petals in the bath wilted and sank. The cabin had become unsettlingly quiet. No creaking floorboards, no sounds of Noah moving around downstairs, just the occasional moan of wind through the pines that suddenly seemed less romantic and more eerie. Finally, I wrapped myself in a robe and went looking for him. I found Noah cross-legged on the porch, eyes closed, breath forming small clouds in the cold night air. "Noah." My voice sounded small even to my own ears. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused, like he was returning from somewhere far away. "Madison. You should be asleep." I was waiting for you. The silk under my robe suddenly felt foolish rather than seductive. I'm meditating, he said as if that explained everything. At midnight? In the cold. This is a sacred place, he said. I can feel it. The mountains, the solitude, it's perfect for deepening my practice. Your practice. In our whirlwind romance he'd mentioned being spiritual, but this level of devotion was news to me. Meditation. Connection to the universal energy. He looked at me with something like pity. You should try it. It's more fulfilling than. His eyes flicked to my robe, clearly seeing the negligee underneath. Physical distractions. I went to bed alone that night, the silk negligee stuffed into the bottom of my suitcase. As I lay awake listening to Noah's continued absence, the shadows from the trees outside cast moving patterns across the ceiling that seemed to be reaching toward me. The next 3 days established a pattern. During daylight hours, Noah would go through the motions of our planned activities. Hiking, visiting a small mountain town, even picnicking by a stream, but there was no joy in it. No connection. Each night he would disappear for hours of meditation, returning to bed long after I'd fallen asleep. On the 4th night I woke to feel him slipping into bed beside me around 3 a.m. I rolled over, reaching for him in the darkness. Noah. He moved away from my touch. Not now, Madison. Then when? I sat up, switching on the bedside lamp. We've been here 5 days and you haven't kissed me once. This is our honeymoon. Noah sat up too, his face half in shadow. Physical intimacy isn't the basis for a true connection. Since when? Because that wasn't your philosophy when we were dating. He sighed, looking at me with that same pitying expression from the porch. Our relationship needs to evolve beyond the physical. Celibacy deepens connection. It purifies what we have. Celibacy. I repeated, the word hanging between us like an uninvited guest. On our honeymoon? It's the path I've chosen for us, he said with quiet finality, turning off the light and rolling away from me. I lay in the darkness, listening to his breathing, trying to reconcile the man beside me with the Noah who had once looked into my eyes and told me I was everything he'd ever wanted. The Noah who had swept me into a whirlwind romance and promised me a lifetime of love and passion. Outside, the wind picked up, making the old cabin creak and groan. For the first time, the isolation that had seemed so romantic now felt oppressive. We were miles from anywhere, surrounded by wilderness with only each other for company. And I was beginning to realize I didn't know who each other really was at all. I woke the next morning with a hollow feeling in my chest. Beside me, Noah's side of the bed was already empty and cold. Through the window, I watched a thin mist hover between the pine trees as the early morning light filtered through. The mountains that had once seemed so magical now felt like silent sentinels, trapping me in this increasingly strange situation. The smell of coffee drew me downstairs. Noah stood at the kitchen counter, pouring water into a French press. I hesitated in the doorway, suddenly unsure how to approach my own husband. "Morning," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "Sleep well." He nodded without turning. "I've been up since 5. The sunrise here is extraordinary." Another experience he hadn't thought to share with me. I pushed the thought away and tried a new approach. "I was thinking we could drive to that waterfall the rental owner mentioned. The one with the swimming hole? It's supposed to be warm today." Noah finally turned, holding his coffee mug with both hands like a barrier between us. "If you'd like." 2 hours later, we stood at the edge of a pristine waterfall. The sunlight caught the spray, creating dozens of tiny rainbows. Any other couple would have been taking selfies, maybe stealing kisses. Instead, Noah stood several feet away from me, staring at the cascading water with detached appreciation. "Isn't it gorgeous?" I tried again, moving closer to him. "It's very powerful," he replied. "All that energy constantly flowing. Never stopping, never needing anything." I didn't know how to respond to that. This wasn't the first time since our arrival that Noah had spoken in these strange, abstract terms, like he was delivering a sermon rather than having a conversation. On impulse, I pulled my sundress over my head, revealing the swimsuit I'd worn underneath. "I'm going in." Without waiting for his response, I waded into the swimming hole, gasping as the cool water hit my skin. For a moment, as I floated on my back looking up at the canopy of trees, I felt free. The weight of the growing distance between Noah and me seemed to dissolve in the water. I closed my eyes, letting the gentle current move me. Madison. Noah's voice startled me. He stood at the edge, still fully dressed. We should head back. Storm clouds are moving in. I looked up at a perfectly clear blue sky. There's not a cloud in sight. Trust me. The weather changes quickly up here. We drove back to the cabin in silence. No storm materialized. That evening I made another attempt. I'd found a dusty box of Scrabble in a cabinet and set it up on the coffee table. Remember how we used to play word games when we first met? I asked, setting out the tiles. You kept beating me because you know all those weird two-letter words. Noah glanced at the board without interest. That seems like a lifetime ago. It was 2 months ago, I said, a hint of frustration creeping into my voice. He sat across from me, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. After playing in near silence for 20 minutes, with Noah making minimal effort moves, he suddenly stood up. I need to begin my evening meditation. It's only 7 o'clock, I protested. You usually don't start until later. The practice calls to me when it's time, he said, already heading for the door. Don't wait up. I swept the Scrabble tiles back into their box with more force than necessary, a few skittering under the couch. As the door clicked shut behind him, I was hit with an overwhelming feeling of abandonment. That night, his absence stretched even longer than usual. At midnight, I finally gave up and went to bed, falling into a restless sleep. I dreamed of being lost in the forest, calling Noah's name, my voice swallowed by the endless trees. The pattern continued for 2 more days. My attempts to reconnect, suggesting a puzzle, cooking his favorite meal, even just trying to have a normal conversation about our future plans, all met with the same distant politeness before he would inevitably disappear for hours. On the 7th day, I woke to find Noah sitting at the foot of the bed watching me sleep. The pale light of dawn cast long shadows across his face. You were talking in your sleep, he said. I sat up, pulling the covers around me. What did I say? You were calling for me. His expression was unreadable. You don't need to, Madison. I'm always with you even when I'm not physically present. That's what you need to understand. Something in his tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I got out of bed and began to dress, needing to put some distance between us. Noah, this isn't working, I said finally, turning to face him. This isn't what I thought our honeymoon would be like. It's not what I thought our marriage would be like. Physical proximity is an illusion, he said, his voice taking on that serene, detached quality that had become so familiar. True connection exists beyond the flesh. What I'm practicing, what I'm trying to show you, is a higher form of love. By ignoring me, by disappearing every night to do whatever it is you do out there. Meditation opens channels to higher consciousness. The celibacy purifies the connection. In time you'll understand. No, I said firmly. I won't. I didn't marry you for higher consciousness. I married you because I loved you, because I thought you loved me. I love your soul, he replied. The body is temporary. I shook my head in disbelief. Where is this coming from? You never talked like this before we got married. He just smiled, that same pitying smile. I'm going to prepare breakfast. You should meditate on what I've said. Later that day, looking for an extra sweater, I opened what was supposed to be Noah's drawer in the bedroom dresser. It was completely empty. Confused, I checked the closet where he'd hung his clothes. Most were gone. In the bathroom, his toiletry bag had vanished from the counter. It was as if he was never planning to actually live with me in this cabin. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone. We barely had 1 bar of service this far up the mountain, but it would have to do. I needed to talk to someone who knew me, who could tell me I wasn't losing my mind. Ava answered on the 4th ring. Maddie? How's marital bliss? The photos you sent of the cabin look amazing. The sound of my sister's voice broke something in me. Ava, I whispered, moving to the farthest corner of the bedroom so Noah wouldn't hear. Something's wrong. What do you mean? Are you okay? I sank to the floor, knees pulled to my chest. Noah's different. He's not the same person I dated. He disappears for hours every night to meditate. He talks about celibacy and higher consciousness. He won't even touch me. Wait, back up, Ava's voice sharpened. Celibacy? On your honeymoon. He says it purifies our connection. Even saying it out loud sounded absurd. Maddie, that's not normal. I know. And the way he looks at me sometimes, It's like he's seeing something else. Someone else. I lowered my voice further. Ava, I'm scared I made a huge mistake. Do you feel safe? My sister asked, cutting to the heart of it. The question hung in the air. Did I? Noah hadn't threatened me or been aggressive, but something felt deeply wrong. Before I could answer, I heard footsteps on the stairs. I have to go, I whispered. I'll call you tomorrow. As I ended the call, Noah appeared in the doorway. His expression told me he'd heard at least part of the conversation. Who were you talking to? He asked, his voice eerily calm. Just Ava, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Checking in. Noah nodded slowly. Dinner will be ready soon. I made your favorite pasta. But as he turned to go back downstairs, I noticed something I hadn't before. A small key hanging from a cord around his neck. It wasn't his usual house or car key. It was smaller, older looking. I wondered what it opened and why he was keeping it so close. That night I couldn't sleep. The mysterious key around Noah's neck haunted me. What did it open? And why was he wearing it like some kind of talisman? As I pushed my food around at dinner, I'd caught him absently touching it several times, like a nervous habit or a ritual. The pasta he'd made, my supposed favorite, wasn't actually my favorite at all. I preferred penne with vodka sauce. He'd made spaghetti with marinara. It was a small thing, but it felt symbolic of everything wrong between us. He didn't really know me. Or worse, he didn't care to remember. Around midnight, Noah slipped out of bed once again for his nightly meditation. I watched through half-closed eyes as he carefully put on a dark sweater and those hiking boots he'd bought specifically for this trip. Meditation and hiking boots. The disconnect between his words and actions had become too glaring to ignore. I gave him 15 minutes before I got up and pulled on my robe. This conversation couldn't wait until morning. 8 days of our 2-week honeymoon had passed in this bizarre emotional isolation, and I couldn't take it anymore. I found him on the back porch, not cross-legged in meditation as I'd expected, but standing alert, looking out at the dark forest as if waiting for something. The moonlight caught the key around his neck, making it gleam. Noah, I said firmly, stepping outside. The night air was bitingly cold, making me pull my robe tighter. He turned, surprised to see me awake and following him. Madison. You should be sleeping. How can I sleep? Nothing about this situation is normal. You're not embracing the spiritual journey. Stop, I interrupted, my voice louder than I'd intended. Just stop with the spiritual journey talk. You're not meditating. At least not only meditating. You're wearing hiking boots, Noah. You're going somewhere. A flicker of something, annoyance, alarm, crossed his face before his expression smoothed back to that eerie calm. The forest is my temple. I commune with nature. The forest is pitch black and freezing at midnight. Tell me the truth. He took a step toward me and I instinctively backed up. Something must have shown on my face because he stopped, his eyes narrowing slightly. You don't trust me. How can I? The words burst out of me. You've been a stranger since the moment we arrived. You disappear every night. You won't touch me. Your things aren't even unpacked in our room. What is going on? Noah stood very still, the moonlight casting half his face in shadow. When he spoke, his voice had a new edge to it. Our union was meant for something greater than physical gratification, Madison. I chose you because you're perfect for the role. Role? What role? A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran through me. The vessel. The feminine divine energy. He touched the key at his neck. I've been preparing for years, waiting for someone like you. When I saw you in that bookstore, I knew you were the one. My stomach knotted. The one for what exactly? The ascension requires balance. Male and female energies aligned but purified through abstinence. His eyes had taken on a feverish gleam. The ritual can only be completed when the moon reaches its zenith during the equinox. I took another step back, my heart hammering. What ritual? Noah, you're scaring me. There's nothing to fear. His voice was soothing now, as if talking to a frightened child. You'll be transcended. Your physical form will become a conduit for something greater. My physical form? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. It's an honor, Madison. Few are chosen. He reached for my hand, but I jerked away. I didn't sign up for this. Whatever this is. His expression hardened. You took vows. Till death do us part. The The way he emphasized death sent another wave of fear through me. I backed toward the door. I need some time alone to process. Noah watched me for a long moment before nodding. Reflection is good. But remember, what's coming cannot be stopped. It's already in motion. I retreated inside, locking the bedroom door behind me. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold my phone. I didn't call Ava again. I didn't want to frighten her, and what would I even say? Hi sis, I think my new husband might be in a cult and I'm supposed to be some kind of vessel? Instead I opened my browser. With the poor reception, pages loaded agonizingly slowly. I searched terms like grounds for annulment, how to annul marriage quickly, and signs of religious cult behavior. As web page after web page confirmed my growing suspicions about Noah's behavior, a plan began to form. I learned that marriages could be annulled for fraud, when one spouse had misrepresented themselves fundamentally before the wedding. If this bizarre spiritual obsession wasn't misrepresentation, I didn't know what was. Noah wasn't the man I thought I'd married. He'd hidden his true self, his true beliefs, until he had me isolated in this mountain cabin. By dawn, my eyes were burning from exhaustion and screen light, but I'd found a lawyer in the nearest town who specialized in family law. According to the website, she'd handled several cases of marriage annulment. It was Sunday, so I'd have to wait until Monday to call. But first thing tomorrow, I was getting out of this situation. When Noah finally returned to the cabin as the first rays of sunlight crept across the floor, I pretended to be asleep. I heard him pause outside the locked bedroom door, trying the handle quietly. Then his footsteps retreated downstairs. I waited until I heard the shower running before I got up, dressed quickly, and steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. I found him in the kitchen making tea as if everything was normal. Steam rose from the mug, fogging the window that looked out on the dense forest surrounding us. I'm leaving today, I announced, standing in the doorway with my arms crossed protectively over my chest. Noah didn't look surprised. He calmly added honey to his tea. That would be unwise. I've made my decision. This marriage was a mistake. It was fate, not a mistake. He stirred his tea slowly, deliberately. You can't fight what's meant to be, Madison. Watch me. My voice was stronger than I felt. I'm calling a lawyer tomorrow to file for annulment. You can stay here with your rituals and your celibacy and whatever else you've been hiding. I expected anger, arguments, maybe even pleading. What I got was far more unsettling. Noah simply smiled, a small knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. Of course. If that's what you need to do. He sipped his tea. I'll help you pack. His calm acceptance was more frightening than resistance would have been. It felt like he knew something I didn't, like my declaration of leaving was somehow part of his plan. I can pack myself, I said, backing away. I'll be out of here by noon. True to his word, Noah didn't try to stop me as I threw my belongings into my suitcase. He moved around the cabin with that same eerie serenity, occasionally touching the key around his neck. Once I caught him looking at his watch and muttering something under his breath like he was counting down to something. At 10 a.m., I managed to get enough signal to call the lawyer's office, leaving an urgent message explaining I needed help with an annulment as soon as possible. To my immense relief, the lawyer herself called back within 30 minutes. This is Patricia Westfield, a crisp, professional voice said. I received your message about an annulment case. I locked myself in the bathroom to take the call, speaking in hushed tones as I explained my situation. The whirlwind romance, the sudden change in Noah's behavior, the spiritual talk and isolation. Based on what you're describing, we likely have grounds for fraud, she confirmed. I can draft the initial papers today and send them electronically. But Ms. Wells, if you feel unsafe in any way, I strongly advise you to leave immediately. I'm already packing, I assured her. Good. There's a women's shelter in town if you need somewhere to stay tonight. I can send you the address. By 11:30, I'd received the preliminary annulment papers by email. I forwarded them to Noah without comment, a formal declaration that our brief marriage was ending. The relief I felt seeing those legal terms, dissolution, misrepresentation, irreconcilable circumstances, was overwhelming. There was a way out of this nightmare. But as I zipped my suitcase closed, I realized Noah had gone quiet. Too quiet. The cabin, always eerily silent, now felt like it was holding its breath. Noah. I called out, my voice thin with tension. No answer. I crept down the stairs, suitcase in hand, ready to leave regardless of where he'd gone. The main floor of the cabin was empty. A note sat on the kitchen counter, written in Noah's precise handwriting. Gone to prepare. Back by sundown. Your journey begins tonight. A chill ran through me. Whatever journey he had planned, I had no intention of being here when he returned. I glanced at my watch, just past noon. Plenty of time to get down the mountain to civilization, to safety. I did one final sweep of the cabin, checking drawers and closets to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. My wedding band I deliberately left on the bedside table. As I moved through the living room, dragging my suitcase behind me, something caught my eye, the corner of the rug near the stone fireplace. It wasn't lying flat like the rest of the carefully arranged decor. One edge was slightly rumpled, as if it had been hastily repositioned. I should have just left. Every instinct told me to walk out the door, get in the car, and never look back. But some stubborn part of me needed to know, needed to understand what had happened to the man I thought I knew. Setting my suitcase by the door, I crossed to the fireplace and pulled back the rug. The wooden floorboards underneath looked identical to the rest of the floor at first glance. Then I noticed the outline, a perfect square with a small metal ring set flush with the wood. A trapdoor. My heart hammered in my chest. This must be what Noah's mysterious key opened. I tugged at the metal ring. The trapdoor didn't budge. Of course it was locked. Noah had the key around his neck, probably deliberately taking it with him to ensure I couldn't discover whatever was hidden below. I stood, running my hands through my hair in frustration. Then I remembered. When we'd first arrived, the rental owner had given us a small box of cabin essentials. Extra batteries, matches, a first aid kit, and a ring of spare keys. For emergency use only, she'd said with a wink. In case you lose yours or get locked out. I dug through the kitchen drawers until I found the small wooden box. Inside, among various keys, was an old-fashioned skeleton key similar to the one Noah wore. My fingers trembled as I carried it back to the trapdoor. The key slid into the lock with a soft click. One turn and the mechanism released. I pulled the trapdoor open, revealing a narrow wooden staircase descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was cool and damp, with an unpleasant undertone I couldn't quite identify, like incense mixed with something metallic. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, every horror movie I'd ever seen flashing through my mind. This is insane, I whispered to myself. But I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and began to descend. The basement was larger than I expected, the ceiling low enough that I had to duck my head in places. My phone's light cut through the darkness, illuminating sections of the space in a harsh white glow that created deep, shifting shadows. The first thing I noticed was the folding table against the wall, covered with electronic equipment. 3 laptop computers sat open, their screens dark, connected to a complex series of wires and small black boxes with blinking lights. As I approached, the screens suddenly illuminated, triggered by motion sensors. I gasped. Each screen showed a different view of the cabin. The bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living room, even the porch. Every space where I'd been living, eating, sleeping, all under constant surveillance. One screen showed the empty living room above me, the open trapdoor visible in the corner of the frame. How long had he been watching me? Even in my most private moments when I thought I was alone, I'd never truly been alone. The violation of it made me physically ill. But there was more to this basement than just surveillance. My light beam swept across the far corner, revealing what at first looked like an altar. Moving closer, I saw it was a small table draped in red cloth. On it stood dozens of candles in various stages of burning, the melted wax forming stalactite-like formations. The sickly sweet smell of incense was stronger here. Behind the table, the wall was covered with photos. Photos of me. Hundreds of them, some I recognized from my social media accounts, others clearly taken without my knowledge. Me leaving my apartment building, teaching in my classroom, shopping at the grocery store. Images spanning months before I'd even met Noah. In the center of this collage was a larger photo of my face, cut from our single hastily arranged engagement photo. My eyes had been outlined in some dark substance, and strange symbols were drawn on my forehead and cheeks. Oh my God, I breathed, backing away. My light beam swung wildly across the basement, revealing more horrors with each sweep. A dress form stood in another corner, draped with my wedding gown, the one I'd carefully packed away after our courthouse ceremony. Noah had insisted I bring it to the cabin for memories. Now it stood like a ghostly version of myself, adorned with more of those strange symbols painted directly onto the delicate fabric. Little bundles of herbs and crystals hung from the sleeves. On a workbench nearby lay personal items that had gone missing over the past week. My hairbrush, a pair of earrings, even my lipstick. Each item had been arranged in precise patterns like components in some twisted spell. A leather-bound journal caught my eye. I picked it up with shaking hands, opening to a random page. Noah's familiar handwriting filled the pages, but the content was nothing like the thoughtful messages he'd written in cards to me during our courtship. These were rambling passages about celestial alignments, energy vessels, and ritual transcendence. My name appeared frequently alongside phrases like perfect conduit and worthy sacrifice. I flipped to the most recent entry, dated yesterday. Asterisk, the vessel questions too much. Alignment with the equinox leaves no room for delay. If she attempts to leave, the contingency must be employed. The ritual will proceed with or without her willing participation. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Contingency. Sacrifice. This wasn't just some eccentric spiritual practice. It was something far more sinister. And I had walked right into it, blinded by what I thought was love. A floor plan of the cabin was pinned to another wall with exit points marked in red. Next to it hung a detailed schedule, with times and dates arranged around astronomical events. Today's date was circled multiple times with a single phrase written beside it: final preparation. The realization crashed over me. Noah hadn't gone for a meditation walk. He was somewhere nearby, preparing for whatever ritual he had planned for tonight. And according to his own journal, he was prepared to proceed, with or without my willing participation. As if confirming my fears, I heard a noise from above, the creak of the front porch step. Noah was back. Earlier than his note had promised. I froze, my phone light illuminating the nightmare around me. The open trapdoor suddenly seemed miles away. I had to get out. I had to get past Noah somehow and escape this mountain before sundown. Before I became part of the shrine he'd built in my image. I killed my phone's flashlight instantly, plunging myself into darkness. My heart thundered so loudly I was certain Noah would hear it through the floorboards above. The front door opened and closed. Footsteps crossed the living room directly over my head, pausing at the spot where my suitcase still waited by the door. Madison. Noah's voice called out, deceptively normal. Then more sharply, Madison. I pressed myself against the cold basement wall, frantically scanning the darkness for another way out. There had to be something, a cellar door, a window, anything. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the open trapdoor, I noticed a small rectangular outline on the far wall. A window. My only chance. The footsteps above moved faster now, checking rooms. I heard him climbing the stairs to the bedroom. I had maybe 30 seconds before he discovered the open trapdoor. I crept across the basement toward the potential window, bumping against a table. Something heavy fell with a dull thud. I froze. The footsteps above stopped too. Then came the sound I'd been dreading, Noah's rapid descent down the steps. I lunged for the window, my fingers scrabbling at its edges. It was sealed shut, the glass grimy and cold. I knew you'd find your way down here eventually. Noah's voice came from behind me, calm and almost admiring. You've always been perceptive. It's one of the qualities that makes you perfect. I turned slowly. Noah stood at the bottom of the stairs, silhouetted against the light from above. The key still hung from his neck, but now he also held something in his right hand. A knife? No, a large crystal, its edges rough and sharp. The preparations are complete, he said, taking a step toward me. It's time for the final ritual. Noah, this isn't you, I said, though I no longer believed it. The man I thought I'd known had never existed. You need help. We can get you help. He smiled, and in the dim light, the expression transformed his once handsome face into something predatory and alien. I don't need help, Madison. I need you. Your energy. Your essence. He gestured to the shrine with his free hand. Do you understand how long I've waited? How carefully I selected you. Watching, learning your patterns, ensuring you were the perfect vessel. His voice had taken on a cadence I'd never heard before, rising and falling with religious fervor. When you entered that bookstore, it wasn't chance. Nothing about our meeting was random. I glanced desperately around the basement. The only exit was the stairs behind him. But there were potential weapons everywhere. Tools on the workbench, heavy electronics on the surveillance table. I just needed a distraction. What exactly do you think is going to happen tonight? I asked, trying to sound curious rather than terrified. I shifted slightly, putting the workbench within reach. The equinox alignment only happens once every 77 years, Noah said, his eyes gleaming with fanaticism. When the vessel is prepared correctly, the transfer of energy creates a gateway. I will transcend my physical form and you. He paused almost tenderly. You will become my eternal anchor in this realm. And if I don't want to be your anchor? I inched my hand toward the workbench. His expression hardened. Your consent would make the ritual more powerful. But it's not required. In the next moment, several things happened at once. Noah lunged forward with surprising speed. My hand closed around the first object it found on the workbench, a heavy metal flashlight. I swung it with all my strength, connecting with his outstretched arm. The crystal flew from his grasp, shattering against the concrete floor. Noah howled, not in pain but in rage. Do you know how long it took to charge that crystal with your essence? He reached for me again, but his foot slipped on the scattered crystal shards. I didn't hesitate. I brought the flashlight down again, this time against his temple. Noah crumpled to the floor, momentarily stunned. It was my only chance. I leaped over his prone form and scrambled up the wooden stairs, slamming the trapdoor behind me. There was no way to lock it from this side. I dragged the heavy rug over it, then pushed the nearby armchair on top for good measure. It wouldn't hold him long, but maybe long enough. I grabbed my suitcase and ran for the front door, yanking it open. The afternoon sun momentarily blinded me. Behind me, I heard a dull thud as Noah pushed against the trapdoor. The rental car sat in the gravel driveway, but my keys were in my purse. My purse that was nowhere in sight. Noah must have hidden it, anticipating my escape attempt. The nearest town was miles away, down winding mountain roads. I'd never make it on foot before he caught up. The forest then. I could lose him among the trees, circle back to the road when I was sure he wasn't following. It was my only option. I abandoned my suitcase and ran toward the tree line, the undergrowth scratching at my legs. Behind me, I heard the front door of the cabin slam open, followed by Noah's voice, distorted with rage. Madison, you can't stop what's meant to be. The forest swallowed me. I crashed through branches and leaped over fallen logs, my breath coming in painful gasps. My foot caught on a root, sending me sprawling. I lay there for a precious second, the taste of dirt and pine needles in my mouth, before forcing myself up again. Noah's voice echoed through the trees, sometimes close, sometimes distant, as if the forest itself was playing tricks with the sound. The ritual will be complete, Madison. You're only making it harder on yourself. I had no sense of direction, no plan beyond putting distance between us. The sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, a cruel reminder of Noah's written note. Back by sundown. Your journey begins tonight. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I stumbled into a small clearing and stopped, desperate to catch my breath and get my bearings. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of running water. The stream we'd visited days earlier. If I could reach it, I could follow it downhill, eventually reaching the road that wound alongside it for a stretch. I moved more carefully now, listening for Noah while making my way toward the sound of water. The stream appeared through the trees, its surface catching the late afternoon light. Relief flooded me as I recognized where I was, less than a mile from the main road. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around to see Noah standing at the edge of the clearing, his temple bloodied from where I'd struck him. Gone was any pretense of the calm, spiritual man. His face was contorted with rage and something else. Desperation. The alignment begins at sunset, he snarled. We're running out of time. There is no we, Noah, I said, backing toward the stream. There never was. You don't understand what you're rejecting, he said, stalking toward me. Immortality. Power beyond comprehension. I just wanted someone to love me, I replied, my voice breaking. That's all. Something flickered in his eyes, not compassion but calculation. I can be that again, he said, his tone suddenly gentle, the voice of the man I thought I'd married. We can forget all this. Start over. For a heartbeat I almost believed him. Almost. but the blood on his temple and the manic gleam in his eyes told the truth. "No," I said firmly. "We can't." I turned and plunged into the stream, the cold water soaking my jeans. Noah shouted behind me, his voice rising to a scream of frustration as I waded to the other side and scrambled up the bank. I didn't look back. I ran alongside the stream until my legs burned and my lungs felt like they would burst. When I finally reached the road, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and purple. I flagged down the first car I saw, an elderly couple who took one look at my wild eyes and soaked clothes and immediately offered help. As we drove down the mountain toward town, past the turnoff to what was supposed to have been my honeymoon cabin, I watched the forest recede behind us. Somewhere in those woods, Noah's alignment was failing, his ritual incomplete. I don't know if he's still there, waiting in that cabin with its shrine to a woman who never really existed except in his twisted fantasy. I don't know if he's looking for another vessel to replace me. The authorities searched the area after I filed my report, but found no trace of him, just an empty cabin with a locked trapdoor they couldn't find the key to open. The annulment went through quickly on grounds of fraud and undisclosed mental illness. I moved to a new city, changed my name, started therapy. But sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, imagining I hear footsteps outside my window. And I always check behind the rugs, looking for hidden doors that might conceal the shrines of false prophets. At a birthday celebration, my father-in-law berated me in front of the family. "Why can't you just keep quiet?" he yelled. I stayed calm, excused myself and walked out. When I came back, I had hired a private investigator and found something shocking about his past that would change everything. I stepped through the front door, the familiar scent of roast beef and flowers hitting me like a wall. It was supposed to be a celebration. A birthday, a chance for the family to gather, but the moment I crossed the threshold I could feel the weight of it all. The heavy expectations, the unspoken rules, the judgment that seemed to be baked into the air, thick and suffocating. The family was already in full swing. The conversation hummed in the background, punctuated by bursts of laughter and military jargon that I couldn't quite follow. I watched my husband, Ryan, talking to his cousins in one corner of the room. His smile was wide, his laughter genuine. It made me feel even more out of place, like I was standing on the edge of something I could never quite be a part of. And then I saw him. General Thompson. My father-in-law. His presence was impossible to ignore. Even though he was standing across the room, I could feel his eyes on me. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of posture that demanded respect. I've learned over the years that it wasn't just his rank that made him so imposing. It was everything about him. His uniform, the medals pinned to his chest, the way his voice carried in the room as if he had the authority to command the air itself. Ryan's family was all military. Every single one of them had served, and those who hadn't were married into the lifestyle. Me. I was the outlier. A civilian. I didn't know the first thing about war or duty or honor, not in the way they understood it. It wasn't that I didn't respect it, but I didn't share that all-encompassing sense of pride they carried with them. I wasn't born into it, and no matter how many years I spent at family gatherings, I was always on the outside. I tried to blend in, smiling at the cousins who talked about their deployments and the challenges they faced. But it was like I was standing on the edge of a conversation I didn't belong in. I nodded along, pretending I understood when they discussed military strategy or the sacrifices they made. But I didn't. And they knew it. They could see it in my eyes. My father-in-law, General Thompson, was the worst of all. He had this way of looking at me like I wasn't quite up to par. The way he tilted his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over me with a quiet judgment that never seemed to end. No matter how many times I tried to fit in, it was like I was still a stranger to him. And every time we were in a room together, the air would change. He didn't have to say anything for me to feel it. His silence was louder than any words could ever be. Tonight, though, it was worse. There was something in the air. A tension that I couldn't shake, like a storm about to break. I kept telling myself it was just my nerves, but the longer I stood there, the more it felt like it wasn't just me. It was everyone in the room caught in the grip of his gaze. Every conversation felt like a test, every gesture a performance. It didn't matter what you said or did. You were always waiting for the moment when General Thompson would turn his attention on you. And then, just as I thought I could slip by unnoticed, it happened. "Ah, there she is," General Thompson's voice rang out, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The air shifted. Conversations stopped. Eyes turned toward me. I didn't even have to look to know he was staring at me. I could feel the weight of his gaze like a physical thing heavy on my skin. My chest tightened and my smile faltered for a second. But I forced it back into place. "Ryan's been telling me how well you're doing," he said, his voice booming across the room as if I were on trial. "Must be nice to live a life without the responsibility of duty hanging over your head." I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks. There was again the familiar sting. The subtle, cutting remark that somehow felt like a public humiliation. He wasn't even trying to hide it. Everyone was watching now, waiting for me to respond. I gave a quick smile, trying to keep my voice even. "It's going well, thank you." But I could see the way his eyes narrowed slightly, as if my answer wasn't enough. As if everything I said was being weighed and found lacking. The tension in the room thickened, and I could feel the collective breath of the family held in anticipation. It wasn't just an innocent question. It was a challenge. A challenge I could never quite seem to win. "Must be nice being able to ignore all the things that matter," he continued, his voice steady, his eyes never leaving mine. "You know, we've got a country to defend, a world to protect. There's a reason we wear these uniforms, a reason we fight. But I guess that's lost on some people." His words weren't just insults. They were a reminder that I could never truly understand what he had done, what his family had done. To him, I was nothing more than an outsider. A woman who didn't know the first thing about sacrifice, about what it took to protect the freedoms we enjoyed. And I could feel the weight of that judgment in every word. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out thin. "I'm sure you've made incredible sacrifices, General. I have a lot of respect for what you've done." He raised an eyebrow, clearly unsatisfied with my response. "Respect's not enough. You have to live it, breathe it. It's not just something you show up for when it's convenient. It's a lifestyle. It's who we are." I knew what he was doing. It wasn't just a conversation, it was a test. A way for him to see how far I would bend, how much I would take. He wanted to see if I would crumble, if I would reveal some weakness. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Not this time. I forced myself to stand a little straighter, to meet his gaze with a calm that was almost fake. "I get it," I said, my voice quieter but no less firm. "But that's not my life. I can't pretend to understand it the way you do." There was a beat of silence. The whole room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his reaction. For a moment, General Thompson just stared at me. And then, without a word, he turned his attention elsewhere, the conversation picking up again like nothing had happened. But I could feel it. The tension was still there, thick and suffocating. It wasn't over. I looked around the room, and for the first time in years, I felt completely alone in this family. The birthday party was just a backdrop to the battle that was always simmering beneath the surface. I had been humiliated once again by the one person whose opinion seemed to matter more than anyone else's. And no matter how hard I tried to fit in, I knew I would always be the outsider in his eyes. The weight of his words lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. As soon as General Thompson turned away from me, the room seemed to exhale in unison. Conversations resumed, but the clatter of forks on plates and the buzz of voices felt distant, almost muffled. I could still feel the sting of his words, like a slap that reverberated through my chest. I didn't know what was worse, the words themselves or the way everyone in the room seemed to be waiting for me to respond. They were all watching, all expecting me to crumble. But I didn't. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. My hands were shaking and my heart was pounding in my chest, but I kept my face composed. A tight smile, a few polite words here and there, trying to seem like I was in control. But inside I was unraveling. Ryan hadn't noticed. He was still in his conversation with his cousins, laughing and joking like nothing had happened. I couldn't tell if he truly hadn't seen the way his father had humiliated me or if he just didn't want to confront it. Either way, it didn't matter. I was alone in this, just as I always was when it came to his family. The hurt, the confusion, the anger, it all bubbled up inside me and I fought to keep it down. I had spent years trying to fit in, to find my place in this rigid military world. And yet, no matter what I did, it was never enough. I was always the outsider, the woman who didn't belong. As the evening wore on, the noise around me grew louder, but the tension in my chest only tightened. I kept looking at Ryan, trying to catch his eye, hoping he'd sense something was wrong, but he was lost in his world, oblivious to the battle I was fighting inside. I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of General Thompson's judgment, the disapproving looks from his cousins, the feeling of being utterly invisible in this family. It was too much. I'm going to step outside for a minute, I murmured to no one in particular, excusing myself from the conversation I had been half engaged in. Nobody paid much attention. They were all too absorbed in their own chatter, and I felt a pang of isolation at how little anyone seemed to care. I walked quickly to the back of the house, the sound of my shoes echoing against the hardwood floor. The hallway felt too narrow, too confining, but it was the bathroom I needed, not space. I could feel the tears threatening to spill, and I couldn't allow that to happen, not in front of them. Not in front of him. The bathroom door clicked shut behind me with a soft thud, and I locked it instinctively. I stood there for a moment, my back pressed against the cool door, trying to steady my breathing. My fingers were clenched into fists, nails digging into the palms of my hands. I hadn't even realized how badly I was shaking until I looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked foreign to me. Pale skin, eyes wide and red-rimmed, lips pressed into a thin line as if I were trying to hold back a flood that was ready to burst. I hadn't cried in front of anyone in years. Not in front of Ryan, not in front of his family. I had to be strong the way they expected me to be. But now the mask was slipping and I wasn't sure I could hold it up much longer. The tears came then, hot and furious, blurring my reflection. I let out a shaky breath, a sob catching in my throat, and the tears fell freely. I didn't care anymore. Not about the birthday celebration, not about the people in the other room, not about the facade I'd been trying so desperately to maintain. All the anger, the hurt, the humiliation that had been building for years finally broke through, flooding me in waves. I wasn't just crying over tonight. No, this went deeper. It was about the years of walking on eggshells, trying to prove myself to a family that had never accepted me. Trying to be someone I wasn't just to earn a sliver of their approval. But no matter how hard I tried, I was always the outsider. I hadn't belonged then and I didn't belong now. I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the cool tile. The sobs racked my body, sharp and uncontrollable. The anger was there too, bubbling under the surface. Anger at myself for letting him get to me, for letting him make me feel small, for letting this family make me feel invisible. I had spent too long trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. The thoughts were a blur, a mix of self-loathing and frustration. Why did I even try? Why had I allowed myself to believe that if I just kept my head down, if I just played the part, things would get better? That I would be accepted? But it never happened. Not for me. Not with him. The bitterness washed over me like a cold wave. I could still hear his voice, the sharpness of his words cutting through the room, cutting through me. His disapproval was like a brand, searing my skin, making me feel like I was nothing more than a nuisance. He didn't care about who I was, about what I brought to the family. I was just the woman who didn't belong in his world. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, but the tears kept coming. I couldn't hold them back anymore, not now. I just let them fall, each drop a release, but each one also carried the weight of everything I had been carrying for so long. It was as if my whole life had been a slow burn. Years of walking on eggshells, years of trying to prove myself, years of trying to be something I wasn't. And tonight, General Thompson had struck a match and set it all on fire. I stared at my reflection in the mirror again, my eyes bloodshot, my makeup smeared. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She was someone I didn't want to be. Someone who let herself be torn apart by the expectations of others. Someone who had given up so much of herself just to be accepted. But for what? The acceptance would never come. Not from him. Not from this family. A rush of anger surged through me, hot and fierce. Enough. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep letting them make me feel less than I was. It was time to stop pretending. Time to stop fighting a battle I could never win. I stood up, my legs unsteady as I wiped my eyes, taking a deep breath to steady myself. There was no point in going back to the celebration. No point in pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I was done. For the first time in years, I felt a clarity I hadn't known before. It wasn't about fitting in anymore. It wasn't about earning anyone's approval. It was about standing up for myself. The tears had cleared my mind. I wasn't going to let this family define me. Not anymore. With one last look at my reflection, I straightened my shoulders and walked out of the bathroom. Whatever came next, I would face it with my head held high. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, leaving the noise and laughter of the party far away, I felt the weight of everything crashing down on me. A mixture of anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sense of isolation swirled inside me. I had finally done it. I had stepped away from my father-in-law's toxicity, but in doing so, I realized just how deep the roots of this family's dysfunction went. How much of my life had I spent pretending? How much of my own identity had I buried beneath their expectations? I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to let the humiliation and the contempt he had shown me become just another chapter in my life that I could forget. It felt like a betrayal, one I had suffered silently for years, but now I was determined to expose the truth. If I had learned anything in the past few years, it was that silence only rewarded those who wanted to bury their secrets. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. My mind was already racing with questions, each one more urgent than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to General Thompson's history. A story that had been hidden for far too long, just like the way he had always treated me. There was more to him than the authoritative, polished exterior he wore. I could feel it deep down. I reached for my phone, the cold screen flashing back at me. I'd never thought I'd be making a call like this, but desperation can make you do things you never thought possible. A private investigator. I didn't know how to start or even what to ask, but I knew it was the only way forward. There had to be something buried in his past. Something that could expose him just as he had exposed me last night. I dialed the number I found online, the voice on the other end smooth but professional. A woman's voice, calm and reassuring, asking how she could help. I gave a quick, tight explanation of what had happened, how my father-in-law had humiliated me at the party, how it wasn't the first time, and how something in my gut told me there was more to this man than anyone knew. After some back and forth about details, the investigator assured me she could look into it. She promised to get back to me within a few days, but I could tell by the way she asked questions that she was already starting to dig. It didn't take long for me to realize that I wasn't the only one curious about General Thompson's past. As the days passed, I began to let my mind wander. What was I really searching for? Was I looking for a way to get back at him for his cruelty? Or was I trying to understand the man who had shaped my husband's entire worldview, the man who held so much power over our lives? Both, I realized. But more than that, I was looking for answers. Answers to questions I'd never even had the courage to ask until now. It had always bothered me that people in the family spoke so little about his military career. General Thompson was a hero after all. Or at least that was the story I'd always been fed. Stories of his bravery, his sacrifice for his country, how he had led his men through some of the most difficult times in recent history. But I had overheard snippets of conversations, whispers that didn't quite add up. Remarks about an incident that never gets talked about, as if there was some kind of unspoken agreement to pretend it never happened. I dismissed those comments at the time, assuming they were just the kind of family gossip I had no place in. But now those whispers felt like clues. The investigator called me back sooner than I expected, her voice flat, almost clinical. She explained that she had started with a few basic queries into his military record. It's all public information, she assured me, but there are things that sometimes get overlooked. People forget or they choose not to dig deeper. The first report she sent me hit like a slap to the face. It wasn't exactly shocking. Nothing about General Thompson's service was a secret after all. But there was something deeply unsettling about seeing it all laid out in black and white. The dates, the assignments, the commendations. But then, just as she'd said, there were things hidden in plain sight. The report mentioned a military operation, a covert mission that had taken place during his deployment in the late 90s. A mission that, on paper, looked successful. The operation had been deemed necessary by higher-ups, part of the standard strategy to maintain control in a war-torn region. But the deeper I dug into the details, the more it didn't make sense. It was glossed over in the official records. No concrete details about what happened, just vague references to unintended casualties. Casualties that were civilians, not combatants. Entire families wiped out in a foreign land, their deaths swept under the rug with a few simple lines of government speak. The investigator had dug up old testimonies, soldiers who had been involved in the operation. A few anonymous letters, smuggled out of the war zone and published in a small independent journal, detailed a cover-up. According to these accounts, the operation had gone horribly wrong. An airstrike that had been called in too hastily, a group of civilians who had been caught in the crossfire. The deaths weren't unintended at all. They were the result of poor decisions made by someone in charge, someone like General Thompson. The report suggested that Thompson, despite being in charge of the operation, had never been held accountable. Instead, the narrative was carefully spun to ensure his reputation remained intact. The survivors of the attack, they said, were quietly silenced. Witnesses who tried to speak out were ignored, their stories erased from history. It was a cover-up, pure and simple. I sat back, my heart pounding in my chest. The man who had always been portrayed as a hero, as the rock of this family, had a past drenched in blood. I had always known there was something off about him, something that didn't match the image. But this was far worse than I had ever imagined. This was the dark truth that everyone had either forgotten or been too afraid to acknowledge. But it didn't stop there. The more I read, the more it became clear that this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern. The investigator had found links to other military operations, ones that had similar signs of cover-ups and mismanagement. My mind raced. What kind of man was I really married into? I felt a cold anger growing inside me, not just at him but at everyone who had allowed this to go on. At the family that worshipped him as a hero without questioning the real cost of that heroism. I had always felt like an outsider in this family, but now I realized I had been blind. I wasn't just an outsider, I had been a victim of their blind loyalty, of their collective silence. The investigator promised to dig deeper. But already a story was unfolding, one that I had never expected to find. I was beginning to uncover pieces of a man who was nothing like the image he had crafted for himself. And the more I learned, the more determined I became to bring the truth to light. The phone call from the investigator hit me harder than I expected. Her voice, usually professional, now carried an undertone of something else. Concern, perhaps, or caution. She explained that she'd uncovered some new documents that would add weight to the reports she'd already sent me. I could feel the tension building as she spoke, every word she said tightening the knot in my chest. I wasn't ready for what she was about to tell me. The general's past, once carefully shielded, was now beginning to unravel. It wasn't just some forgotten mistake. It was a deliberate cover-up, one that had been orchestrated by high-ranking officials who saw fit to protect their own, no matter the cost. I could hear the rustling of paper on her end as she began to describe the operation, each detail hitting harder than the last. It wasn't just about a failed mission or some minor error in judgment. This was much more. The operation, which took place in a war-torn country overseas, had been a disastrous attempt to secure a strategic location. It was supposed to be a quick operation, low risk, high reward. In reality, it had been anything but. The mission was supposed to neutralize enemy forces, but instead, innocent civilians were caught in the crossfire. Families, children, lives torn apart by a decision that should never have been made. The orders had been clear: secure the area at all costs. General Thompson had followed those orders without question, without hesitation. The aftermath of that mission was a mess. The public record was scrubbed clean, the civilian deaths reduced to footnotes in official military reports. But the whispers, those whispers, the ones I had overheard in hushed tones, were more than just rumors. They were true. A few brave souls had tried to speak up, but their voices were drowned out. What could a few soldiers do when the entire machinery of the military-industrial complex was pushing the story in another direction? The civilians, their grief and suffering, meant nothing when weighed against national interests. The investigator's voice dropped as she went on, revealing even more. She told me about the government's response to the scandal. The families of the dead civilians had been silenced, offered compensation that couldn't begin to ease their pain, but that was only part of the story. Those who had survived, those who had lost everything, were given little to no support. And those who spoke out against the operation were either ignored or, worse, discredited. The military had its way of sweeping these things under the rug. General Thompson had been one of the officers responsible for executing that operation, and despite the lives lost, despite the terrible consequences, he had been protected. His reputation remained unscathed. He was promoted, lauded as a hero for his bravery and leadership, but behind closed doors he knew the truth. He knew what he had done. And so did the government. They had all been complicit in silencing the truth. The very thing he had built his career on was built on the blood of innocents. My hands were trembling as I listened. I thought about the stories I had heard growing up about heroes. Real heroes who fought for freedom and justice. That was what my husband had always believed about his father. What everyone in the family had believed. The stories we had all been told, fed to us like some sanitized version of history, had all been lies. The general wasn't a hero. He was a man who had made a decision that cost lives and never had to face the consequences. The investigator paused before continuing. She explained that some of the soldiers who had participated in the operation were still alive, some of them even haunted by the events of that day. They had lived with the guilt of taking innocent lives, but more than that, they had been left to carry the burden of a decision they had been forced to follow. They had lived with the truth while the general had gone on to bigger and better things, his name untouched by scandal. Her words were like shards of glass cutting through me. I hadn't known the full extent of what had happened, what my father-in-law had been a part of. I had always known that something wasn't right, but now the reality of it was so much darker than I had ever imagined. The man I had tried to respect, the man I had tried to understand, had played a direct role in this tragedy. His actions had not only ruined the lives of innocent people abroad but had also created a ripple effect that reached into my own life. I put the phone down, my heart hammering in my chest. The truth, raw and unforgiving, was now staring me in the face. I could hardly breathe. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. How could I have been so blind? For years, I had watched my husband idolize his father, bask in the light of his accomplishments. But now I was beginning to see the cracks in the facade. I wanted to scream, to tell everyone the truth, to expose him for the man he really was. But something inside me hesitated. If I spoke out, if I shared what I had learned, it wouldn't just be the general who would suffer. It would be my family, my husband, the man I loved. What would this revelation do to our lives? What would it do to the family I had tried so hard to belong to? I felt a sense of betrayal so deep that it nearly consumed me. Not just by my father-in-law, but by everyone who had let this go on. My husband, who had always been so loyal to his father, would have to live with the knowledge of what his hero had done. Could he ever look at him the same way again? Would he believe me? Or would he think I was simply trying to destroy the reputation of the man who had shaped his life? I thought about the families who had suffered, the lives that had been lost, and the lies that had been built around the truth. I thought about the innocent civilians who had been nothing more than collateral damage in a war that had never been theirs to fight. And I thought about the people who had tried to make it right, but had been silenced, dismissed as liars or troublemakers. But then something inside me hardened. I couldn't keep this secret. I couldn't live with the weight of knowing the truth and doing nothing. I wasn't just going to stand by and allow him to continue living this lie. He had destroyed lives, and now it was time for the truth to come out. I knew what I had to do, but the question remained: how? How could I expose him without destroying everything else in the process? It wasn't just a matter of right or wrong anymore. It was a matter of what I was willing to lose in the pursuit of justice. Could I bring myself to do it? Could I take this step knowing the cost? The decision loomed large in my mind, each second stretching longer than the last. A week had passed since I'd first learned the truth. A week of sleepless nights, of pacing through my house with the weight of the knowledge I'd uncovered pressing on me like an anchor. Each day felt like an eternity, and each time I looked at my husband, I wondered how much longer I could keep the secret. My father-in-law's image had shattered in my mind, and yet I found myself wondering, was this really the right thing to do? Was it worth it? I knew I had to confront him. The lie he'd built his life on needed to be exposed, even if it meant tearing apart the family he had so carefully crafted. But the thought of facing him, of calling out the man who had always been so coldly authoritative, yet so revered, was terrifying. I hadn't prepared for this moment, hadn't truly considered how much it would hurt, how much it would cost me. I called him on the morning of the confrontation, my voice steady as I spoke, despite the tumult inside me. "I need to talk to you about something," I said. "It's about a family matter. Can you come over later?" His voice was calm as usual, but there was a subtle edge to it, as if he sensed something. "Of course. I'll be there at 3. When the doorbell rang that afternoon, my heart skipped a beat. I hadn't realized how much anxiety I'd been carrying until the moment I saw him standing there, just like every other time, tall, imposing, dressed in his military uniform as if he had never fully left the army. The door creaked open and I felt a shiver run through me. "Come in, General," I said, trying to mask the coldness in my voice with forced politeness. He stepped into the house, glancing around as if everything were perfectly normal. "What's this about then?" he asked, a faint hint of amusement in his tone. I led him into the living room where I had already set the stage. A low table between us, a chair for him and my seat across from him. Everything felt too perfect, too rehearsed. I almost felt like an actor about to perform a scene I could not escape. "Please sit," I said, gesturing toward the chair. I couldn't look him in the eye, not yet. I had to control my breath, my heartbeat. It wasn't just the confrontation I feared. It was the truth. The truth that would change everything. He settled into the chair, his posture straight, his gaze steady. He looked at me as if waiting for some trivial conversation, but I wasn't sure I could pretend any longer. "You've built an image for yourself over the years," I started, my voice firmer now. "A reputation as a hero. But what if that reputation is built on lies?" His face didn't change, but his jaw tightened just a fraction. I could see it, the mask slipping ever so slightly. He knew something was wrong. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said smoothly, his voice unwavering. "I'm talking about your military service," I pressed. "I'm talking about the operation that changed everything, the one that you've managed to hide for so long." His eyes narrowed, but he didn't interrupt. He hadn't even flinched. The silence between us felt like it stretched for an eternity, and in that moment, I knew the truth was something he'd been running from for years. I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of papers. The investigators' findings, the reports, the evidence. Everything I had learned was here in black and white. No more speculation, no more half-truths. Just the facts. I laid them on the table between us. "Here it is," I said, my voice unshakable. "The truth. The operation in that foreign country. The civilians who died. You were there. You were in charge." His eyes flicked to the papers, but he didn't touch them. "This is nonsense. Lies. Fabrications designed to ruin my name." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. "It's not a lie. I've spoken to the soldiers who were there. I've seen the records. And you knew what happened, didn't you? You knew the civilian casualties were swept under the rug and you didn't speak up. You let innocent people suffer." He stiffened in his chair, the color draining from his face. For a moment he looked vulnerable, unsure, like a man who had been caught, exposed. But only for a moment. "This is an attack on my honor," he growled, his voice rising. "I served this country with distinction. I was protecting our interests, making sure this country remained safe. And you have the audacity to accuse me of murder. It's not about protecting this country. It's about what happened to those people," I replied, my voice growing louder. "Their lives were destroyed because of an order you gave. And now you sit here acting as if nothing ever happened." His eyes hardened. The calm demeanor he had worn for so many years was gone, replaced with a cold fury that I had never seen before. "You don't know what you're talking about," he spat. "You think you can tear down everything I've built? Everything I've sacrificed? You think you can just—" "I don't want to tear you down," I interrupted. "I want the truth to come out. I want you to be held accountable for what happened. It's not about you anymore. It's about what's right." His hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. "You have no idea what you're doing. This is not your battle to fight. This is a matter of national security, of duty and honor. You think I haven't paid the price for those decisions?" I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. "You made your choice. You chose to cover it up. You chose to protect your own reputation over the truth. And now you'll pay the price." His face twisted in anger, his voice thick with disdain. "You'll regret this. You'll regret ever questioning me." I stood as well, walking slowly toward him, the intensity in the air so thick I could hardly breathe. "I'll never regret standing up for what's right. Not when it means exposing a man who thought he was above the law, above the truth. You're not untouchable, General." He stood there, frozen, his eyes burning with fury. For a moment I saw the man I had feared all these years. The man who would stop at nothing to protect his own legacy. But now I saw him for what he really was. A man who had been hiding behind a mask, running from his own actions. "You think this is over?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. "You think this will be the end of it? I have the power to bury you, to destroy everything you've worked for. Don't think for a second that you're safe." I didn't flinch. "I've already made my peace with whatever happens next. But you, your reputation, your life, it's not going to stay intact. Not after what you've done." He turned and stormed out of the room, leaving me alone in the silence of the aftermath. The truth was now out there. There was no going back. But as I watched him leave, I knew this confrontation was only the beginning. The truth would come to light no matter what. And I would make sure of it. The air in the room was heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken words and the force of emotions that had been brewing for far too long. I stood there, my chest rising and falling with each breath, my body still trembling from the confrontation. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I had expected resistance, of course. I had expected him to deny it, to try and bury the truth with his usual charm, his calculated calm. But what I hadn't expected was the fury. The rage that bubbled up from deep inside him, a side of the general I had never seen before. It was raw, uncontrollable, like a man who had spent his life hiding behind a shield of authority and military discipline, only to have it shattered in an instant. He stood there, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw so tight I thought it might break. For a brief moment I wondered if he was going to lunge at me, physically try to silence me. But instead he took a deep breath and in a voice that was deceptively calm said, "You don't understand, do you?" I met his gaze, standing tall despite the terror I felt creeping up my spine. "I understand enough to know that what you did was wrong. You took innocent lives and you covered it up. You don't get to hide behind that military duty nonsense anymore." His eyes narrowed and for a second I thought he might laugh. But then he spoke again, his voice low, venomous. "You think this is about duty? You think this is about protecting people? It's more than that. It's about sacrifice. It's about doing what no one else is willing to do. You, with your soft little life, couldn't possibly understand what it's like to make those kinds of decisions. To carry that burden. I did what I had to do to protect this country. And I don't expect a pampered civilian like you to appreciate it." I felt my blood boil at his words. "Pampered? You're calling me pampered? You think I've lived an easy life? You think I don't know about sacrifice? Maybe I didn't fight in a war, but I've been fighting for my place in this family. Fighting to be seen as something more than just your daughter-in-law. You've never given me an ounce of respect, and now you're using your military duty to justify murder." His eyes flashed and I saw something dark in them, something ugly. "I didn't murder anyone," he snarled. "I made tough choices. And if you can't see that, then you're just another soft civilian who doesn't get it. You've never been in the field. You've never had to make a call that could cost lives." "I don't need to have been in the field to know what's right and wrong," I shot back, my voice rising in defiance. "You think because you wore a uniform that gives you a free pass to do whatever you want to take lives without consequence? Well, I'm done letting you hide behind that excuse." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. And just as I thought the tension might snap, the door opened. My husband stepped into the room, his face pale, eyes wide with shock. He had heard the argument from the other room, no doubt, and now he was in the middle of it, unable to ignore it any longer. "What the hell is going on?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the betrayal of seeing his father in such a vulnerable, angry state. He had always been so blind to what was happening under the surface, so eager to protect the family from anything that threatened the image they'd built. I didn't even have to answer. The general, realizing the gravity of the situation, turned his focus to his son. "This is none of your business," he snapped, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't need to get involved in this." But my husband was already walking toward us, his eyes flicking from me to his father, taking in the full scope of the situation. "What's going on?" he asked again, his voice rising now, laced with anger. "What is this about?" I stood up straighter, the words ready to spill out, the truth now at the tip of my tongue. "It's about your father's past. The operation he was involved in that killed innocent people. He's been hiding it for years and I finally found out the truth." The shock on his face was immediate. His eyes widened, his mouth went dry. "What?" he whispered as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Dad, is this true?" The general turned toward him, a look of utter disbelief crossing his face. "Don't listen to her, son. She's just trying to destroy me. This is all a lie. A smear campaign. You know I've always done what's best for this country." But my husband wasn't having it. "No, Dad. I need to know the truth. Did you kill those people?" The general's face twisted in a way I had never seen before. For a brief moment I saw the mask slip entirely. The general was no longer the unshakable, commanding figure who had always seemed so invincible. In that moment he was just a man who had been caught, exposed. The facade cracked. "I did what I had to do," he yelled, slamming his fist down on the table. "I protected this country, protected you. I sacrificed everything for this family, for this country, And you think you can tear me down over one mistake? I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't the man I had been married to, nor the father-in-law I had grown accustomed to. This was something darker, something that had been hidden behind layers of pride and denial for so long. And it was all coming to the surface. You can't just destroy him like this, my husband cried, his voice rising in desperation. You don't know what it's like. You don't understand, he made hard decisions. No, I shouted back, my voice raw. He made selfish decisions. And now those decisions are destroying everything. In that moment, it was as though the room itself was closing in on us. My husband was caught between his loyalty to his father and the truth I had just uncovered. He looked at me, torn, and then at his father, who stood there, seething with anger. I saw the pain in his eyes, the shock of being caught between the two most important people in his life. And then, as the tension boiled over, my father-in-law's voice dropped, almost as if he were speaking to himself. This family will never be the same again, he muttered. It was a statement of defeat, a grim acknowledgement of the truth that had been revealed. But as I stood there watching everything fall apart, I felt something shift inside me. The power I had once felt like I had to fight for was now mine. I wasn't the meek outsider anymore. I wasn't the one who had to wait for permission to speak. I was the one who held the truth. And that truth had shattered everything. But as the chaos unfolded before me, I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, this victory had come at a great cost. Would it really be worth it in the end? Would I be able to live with the consequences of exposing a man who had built an empire of lies? Or had I lost something too in the process? My mind churned with those questions, but one thing was clear. There was no turning back now. The days following the confrontation were filled with an overwhelming sense of chaos. It was as if the dust had not yet settled, but the storm had already passed. The general's name had been dragged through the mud, his once glorious reputation shattered into pieces. Family members who had once idolized him now whispered behind closed doors, exchanging glances of disbelief, but also of newfound caution. It was like they had been living in a carefully constructed illusion that I had just torn apart with one simple act. Apologies had come from some quarters, though they felt hollow. The ones who had been most vocal in their support of him, who had rallied behind his military persona, now seemed like shadows of their former selves, offering words that felt rehearsed, insincere. I could see through the facade, and it made me question whether any of the relationships I had thought were real had ever been more than just part of the grand illusion we had all played a part in maintaining. But some family members had distanced themselves entirely, choosing to side with the general, or perhaps simply avoiding the truth altogether. I wasn't sure which was worse, the coldness from those who had quietly accepted his actions or the open hostility from others who still clung to their blind loyalty. It wasn't just my father-in-law who was disillusioned. The family had splintered, and in the process so had my own sense of belonging. It was the distance from my husband that hit hardest. At first he had tried to stay neutral, unsure of how to process what I had revealed. But as the days wore on, I saw the subtle shifts in his behavior. The tension in his shoulders when he came home, the way his eyes darted away from mine when we spoke. It was as if the very foundation of our marriage had cracked under the weight of the secret I had unearthed. He was angry with me. Not just angry, disappointed, hurt. I could see it in the way he looked at me, a kind of resentment that hadn't been there before. I had always known there were things about him I would never fully understand, things buried in the past that even his closest friends and family would never dare to speak of. But now the distance between us had become a chasm. He couldn't reconcile the man he thought his father was with the truth I had exposed. And I couldn't reconcile the man I had married with the one who would defend a man like his father. The late-night conversations had turned into stilted, tense silences. The questions I had hoped he would ask me, the understanding I needed from him, never came. Instead, we sat in rooms that felt too large, too empty, our words of formality. He didn't understand my need to act, nor did he seem to care anymore. And that was the hardest part, because I hadn't done this for anyone else. I hadn't done it for revenge, or for the sense of triumph that might come with exposing someone's darkest secret. I had done it for me. And somewhere along the way I had lost him in the process. In the stillness of my own thoughts, I began to wonder if it had all been worth it. What had I really gained? The general was tarnished, yes, but so was I. What had been the point of dragging all of this to the surface, only to find myself standing amidst the wreckage? Had I truly won? Or had I simply become another pawn in a much larger game? One filled with power plays, manipulation, and consequences I hadn't fully grasped at the time? At one point I found myself wandering through the house, my footsteps muffled on the wooden floors, unsure of where I belonged anymore. The walls that had once felt like a home now seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with their memories. The pictures on the mantel, the heirlooms passed down through generations, all of it felt like an anchor pulling me deeper into a world I no longer fit into. Every corner of the house seemed to echo with whispers of who I was supposed to be, who I was expected to become. But who had I become in all of this? And then one evening while I sat alone on the porch watching the sun set in a violent burst of orange and pink, something shifted. It wasn't a grand realization but a quiet, almost imperceptible change in my perspective. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need the apology of my husband, or the validation of the family. I didn't need to fit into their mold anymore. What I had gained was far more valuable than the destruction of my father-in-law's reputation. It was the understanding that I could stand on my own, not as a victim, but as someone who had finally taken control of her own narrative. I didn't need their acceptance. I never had. The strength I had thought I would find in revenge, in exposing the lies, had been there all along, hidden beneath layers of fear and doubt. I had been afraid of what would happen if I spoke up, if I revealed the ugly truths that had been buried in the corners of my world. But in that moment, as the evening light began to fade, I realized that the power I had been searching for wasn't in the destruction of another person. It was in the ability to speak my truth and stand by it regardless of the consequences. As I stood there, the wind brushing against my face, a sense of peace washed over me. The world was still chaotic, the family still divided, and my relationship with my husband was hanging by a thread. But I no longer felt the need to fix it all. I had done what I needed to do. I had faced the truth, and in doing so, I had found something I never expected: myself. The days that followed weren't perfect, and I didn't expect them to be. There were still arguments, still moments where the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. But I no longer felt lost in the turmoil. I no longer felt like I had to be someone else to fit in, to be accepted. I had walked away from the toxic expectations that had plagued me for years, and in doing so, I had become something stronger, something more authentic. I had never been someone who wore their anger as a badge of honor. Revenge wasn't what had driven me. It was the quiet, subtle force of self-respect, the refusal to stay silent and shrink into the shadows. I wasn't the meek outsider anymore. I was someone who had chosen her own path, and no one could take that away from me. Walking away from the family wasn't easy. It wasn't the happy ending I had imagined when I first uncovered the truth. But it was mine. And in that, I had found a freedom that no one could ever take from me. The family, the general, my husband, none of them could define who I was anymore. That was my choice, and in the end that was the most powerful thing of all.